when normal turns to nightmare. Realizing that your friend might be a psychopath. One of my neighbors when I was little had some hamsters. One day I was at her house and she started squeezing them and making them poop because she thought that was funny. She just kept squeezing them harder and harder. I told her to stop or she might hurt them, and she started laughing. The next day I asked her grandma what had happened to her hamsters and she told me they'd all died. Another time we were making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in her room, I don't know why in her room, and she cornered me with the knife while laughing. I looked her up a few years ago and I found her mugshot. Go figure. Was she named Azula by any chance? I played soccer with a guy that had a real short temper and enjoyed playing the sport as rough as possible, even at practice. The coaches had to tell him to calm down all the time. Everybody hated him and stayed away from him. Several years later, he unalived a friend of mine over some green herb. He hid the body under a pile of leaves in his backyard. When I heard the news, I wasn't surprised in the least. My older sister used to absolutely torture me when I was a kid. When I was 5 or 6 and she was 7 or 8, I was afraid of bugs. She'd spend hours trapping bugs and putting them in my Matchbox cars. Then she'd say, "Hey Stephanie, you want to play cars?" I'd get super excited because she never wanted to play with me. I'd run over to my cars and there would be bugs crawling all over them. Then when I was 7, I was obsessed with Barbies. One day she grabbed my favorite Barbie and Ken and threw them under the bed. I stuck my tongue out at her and climbed under the bed to get them. As I army crawled in the cramped space, my arms started to hurt. I was getting pricked all over every time I moved, and I was bleeding. It took me until I was halfway under the bed to figure out what my psychopath sister had done. She had spent all morning weaving pushpins into the carpet so the points would stick up and prick me. She had then tricked me into climbing under the bed. So there I was, halfway in with my precious Barbie and Ken at the back wall. I had to decide whether to cut my losses and abandon Barbie and Ken, or climb the rest of the way through this Saw-esque minefield and then back out. I bit the bullet. Amy, if you read this, F you. My sister is a textbook narcissist now, but back then it was definitely oppositional defiant disorder, the childhood form of antisocial personality disorder. She hid the worst of everything from our parents. Thankfully, it wasn't long until I got bigger, stronger, and smarter than her. Then I could defend myself. I think that prevented her from becoming really psychotic. I reeled her in. These days we're in our 40s, and at best she's an occasional nuisance. Okay, well she should thank her lucky stars that you prevented her transformation into stupider female Jigsaw. That's awful, and I'm glad that you mostly have your peace from her. A few years ago, I had to put my cat, Rex, down. He was 21 years. In passing, not too long ago, I mentioned this to a friend that I'd known for over 35 years. Out of nowhere, he made the statement, "I always liked killing cats." I did a double take to see if he was kidding. He was not. I haven't spoken to him since. The crap that people say about pets to people who love them is astounding. I told a friend that I was struggling to come up with the cash for a procedure that my cat needed or he'd most likely die. I wasn't asking for help or advice, just venting. He told me he could take care of it for 50 cents, and when I asked how, he told me that was the price of a bullet. My dad said for years that somebody I knew at primary school, ages 7 through 11, was a psychopath because he often got in fights with random people and showed no empathy after breaking their bones. And he'd often lie about staff to get them in trouble. I thought he was scary and a bit violent, but an alright guy overall. Then I found out a couple of years ago he'd been sentenced to life for murder. She kicked my leg while we were ice skating once to make me fall. I really hurt my back. I couldn't get up, I could barely talk, and I had trouble breathing. I asked her to please call someone, but she just stood there and laughed at me for a few minutes until I was able to crawl to my phone and call somebody. She also said to my adopted brother that he was worth nothing because even his real parents left him in the trash. It was the only time I've ever punched someone in the face. While my ex-boss at the youth service knew she was wrong about something really serious and I had to report it because of due diligence. We work with vulnerable children and young people, so I went to her office to have an adult, grown-up conversation with her as I wanted to be straight up with her about what I was going to do, and she actually barricaded the door to her office to stop me from leaving. She had me cornered in my wheelchair, and the office was too small for me to turn around. Meanwhile, my colleagues were outside the office trying to break down the door to rescue me. I mean, what happened? Did you call the police on her? No, but I told her I'd have to call the police if she didn't let me out, though. Two male, quite hard streetwise colleagues told her that they'd break the door down if she didn't let me out. When I saw them afterwards, they looked more scared than me. Finally, she let me out. I sent my resignation letter to her the next day without going back to work. He kicked my dog, and when I told him off, he said something along the lines of, "Well, it's not like its feelings matter." Another friend said, "Well, how would you feel if we kicked you?" And he said that we couldn't do anything that would hurt him. I think he joined the military, but honestly, I've lost all contact. I was in the military for a while. There's a lot of really crappy people there. I can confidently say for a fair bit of them that if they weren't in the military, they'd be in prison instead. One of the reasons I dislike all of the "all servicemen or veterans are heroes" mindset is that I tell people all the time I served with plenty of idiots and complete buttholes. When I was 8, I let my older cousin, who was probably 11 or 12 at the time, hold my hamster. She was being really rough with it, so I told her to put it back into its cage. And she got real mad after that and just stared at me for about 2 minutes before she turned around and threw my hamster into the wall. My poor hamster died instantly, and I was crying because my hamster had just gotten murdered. I knew after she threw it that something was extremely wrong with her, and my mum made my aunt come and pick her up, and she wasn't allowed to be near any animals after this. It's been almost 4 years since I've talked to her, but apparently she gets into fights almost weekly, and beat someone so bad they had to go to the ER. She's in therapy and has spent time in juvenile detention. All of my other cousins are afraid of her, and many of us think she's going to eventually end somebody. I honestly think the best place for her would be a mental health hospital. When he beat up my grandma with an exercise bike. Wow, that went from 100 to 110 real quick. When I had a parent-teacher conference with a student of mine's mum and dad. This was maybe 15 years ago, but it stuck with me. The daughter had some minor issues with math, she was in the 3rd grade, and the father insisted that he was a physics professor at an Ivy League university nearby. When I told him that his daughter was struggling with the standard addition and subtraction algorithm, he got upset and told me he didn't understand what the word algorithm means. This guy was a physics professor? Okay. When I began to explain, his face got completely flat and devoid of any expression. His wife immediately noticed the look on his face. He was staring straight at me, not blinking or saying anything. So her face blanched and she started pulling on his arm and trying to get his attention. Off me, I assume. When I described it later, I called it a serial killer face. This guy eventually let his wife pull him out of the room and end the conference. I immediately told my principal and said that I refused to do another conference alone with these people. I definitely felt as though if I were alone with this man, he would have come after me physically. His wife's response was very telling. I only dealt with her from then on. When I was about 7 or 8, there was a kid who was about 6. We found a small bird that fell out of its nest. In the time it took for me to go home and tell an adult, he had put it on the road and run it over on his bike and laughed. Last I heard, he's in jail for attacking his spouse. Screw you, Kevin. Well, I'm already at the point where I feel like we've had enough internet here for one day, and we're not even halfway through this video. So this is going to be a real fun one, you guys. Oh, and I've got another one to record after this as well. Yay, 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 yay. I dislike this sort of topic so much. My period was late, and I had to let the dude know it was. It was the first time my period was ever late while on birth control pills, but I'd recently switched to a different one. He immediately started blaming me for not taking my birth control right, and that if I was pregnant, he would end me. I even told him I doubted I was pregnant, and not to worry, and that the doctor told me that this might happen. Apparently women are most likely to be murdered when they're pregnant. When I was pregnant, I had to have a hospital appointment every fortnight, and at every meeting, they'd ask, "How is it at home? How does your partner make you feel?" and questions like that. Eventually, I asked why, and my midwife said, "I have to ask because statistically, partners are more likely to start mistreating you when you're pregnant. And statistically, it takes someone an average of 13 times of being asked before they admit that someone is mistreating them." Which hands down was one of the most heartbreaking facts to learn while pregnant. I went to high school with a guy. We weren't close, but we had a lot of mutual friends, so we were around each other a lot. Once, he beat up a guy with a tire iron when the guy tried to scam him when he was selling some Mary J or something. Later on, he went to Iraq and was in some trouble. He came home on leave at some point, and I was at a bar playing pool with him, and he nonchalantly talked about killing people over there. He said that he enjoyed it. He was always very calm and chill when I was around him, but I tried to avoid him after that. There was something broken in there. The weirdest part is that he'd have these moments or anecdotes of extreme violence, but he always related them calmly. Never felt any sort of regret for any of it. Obviously, you can't diagnose someone off of that sort of thing, but I've read that sociopaths make very good soldiers. and he was fairly successful in the army, I believe. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? This guy found God 3 times in the course of a single year. Each time after he had been seen doing significant property damage or mistreating a girl he was with. It was like the God thing was a quick trick to get people off his back. I met an individual who later pled guilty to his involvement in about 14 murders. During an interview about his childhood and personal life, it became very apparent that he had no interest in other people and that they were basically NPCs to him, even his girlfriend and child. He was in a gang and his behavior was basically shadowing the other guys with status. He had a girlfriend because that's what the other guys did. He had a fancy car. He wore the right clothes. The other guys figured out early on that he wasn't bothered by murder or firefights, so he was their hit guy. During the interview, he was perfectly polite but utterly flat in his affect and didn't attempt to dissemble or minimize a lot of the terrible things that happened to him or the things he had done. It made for a very interesting interview. When my best friend asked me to find a cat and end it with her in the backyard, we broke contact after that. I heard from a mutual friend it was actually confirmed by her therapist that she was an actual sociopath a few months later. Okay, update. So a few people have pointed out that this couldn't have been confirmed by her therapist. Remember, this was the information which went through at least 2 other teenagers before it came to me. The explanation of what was wrong with her might have been oversimplified to sociopath or lost in translation along the way. Or completely fabricated for all I know, this was teens we're talking about. But that was the message I got. I'm a college librarian. He was one of my students who came in a lot. He was real charming and good-looking and altogether empty inside. No depth, no emotion, and no regard for others. One of our staff straight up said, "Oh, that guy's a psychopath." She had been a social worker, so I trusted her opinion and agreed. He collected types of women. He told me about seducing a female married military chaplain and getting her to do things that she initially didn't want to do. Then he got bored with her and moved on. He eventually got his master's degree and now works on the military base making big bucks, getting everyone else to do his work for him. Sometimes psychopaths are dangerous in other ways. I think one of my university professors was a sociopath. He was brilliant in his field, but he just didn't function correctly as a human. He set up strange rules of interaction for office hours. He had a huge personal bias on people based on things like haircuts, and there were even rumors of him being the reason for people not wanting to be alive anymore due to the way that he talked to people who failed their final exams, like the last oral exam after he failed the written one 3 times. He'd be smiling, smirking, like a small boy whose grandma had found him with the hand in the cookie jar, while telling people their years of education were wasted. What is it with crazy people and killing cats? I knew he was a psychopath when he told me he was a psychopath. I'm not even kidding. He's a pretty cool guy though and goes to therapy and everything for it. He does his best to relate to people and judge emotion, but it's difficult for him to hold relationships. Pretty smart and he's doing the best he can, hopefully one of the more light-hearted stories on here. I mean, not every psychopath is a monster. They simply have no remorse and feel very little emotions. It makes it easy to do heinous things when you don't feel bad for it, but it still doesn't change the character of the person. Some people are good, even if they feel no remorse. There's no universal law that says psychopath equals ultimate evil person. Yeah, honestly, if it's recognized and treated, much like narcissism, it can be more of a quirk to work around rather than a complete red flag in and of itself. These people can't really help that they're born this way, but they can take steps to do better in life. I went to university with a guy that I'm positive is a psychopath. Quite pleasant to be around, but he's got no regard whatsoever for you. Quite charming actually, and the best ladies' man I've ever seen. But once he does the deed with them, he's done. Like literally, they don't exist to him. I've seen him break up 2-year-long relationships of other people's and then dump the girl the morning after. I suspected he was a psychopath, but we took a psych class together and he confirmed it to me. Like straight up told me he's been diagnosed as a teen. I wouldn't call him a bad guy, but he didn't see me or anyone else as human. Just things he enjoyed interacting with. Played D&D and board games with that guy for years. I still have him on my Facebook, but I haven't seen him in like a decade. I knew a guy exactly like this, right down to him being an avid D&D player. That's how we knew him. Plus, I did community theater with him. He broke up so many couples we knew. He'd worm his way in, sleep with the girl, and then act like she didn't exist. We found out more than one gal was pretty drunk when they slept with him. One of my friends was married with a kid and ended up pregnant with this guy's kid. She was a super fun person, outgoing and confident. After this encounter, she changed. She was really depressed and just a completely different person. She was afraid to call it the unspeakable act because she was drunk, so she saw it as her own fault. Her husband stood by her, but the depression took too large of a toll and they eventually split up. It was so clear that she hated herself. What sucks the most is that he was well known for doing this. He thought it was funny. Then a couple of years later, he meets a girl, gets married, and he has 2 kids. He's always posting their happy family pictures on Facebook, and every time I see them, I just think about the destruction he's left behind. I have a hard time believing that he's faithful to his wife. It's funny that you said that he didn't see you as anyone else as human, he just enjoyed interacting with you. I said the exact thing about this guy to my husband once, because this guy was super charismatic. So even though he consistently hurt people, he had this way of making everyone forget about it. I can't explain it, but it's weird. One time I said to my husband that this guy acted like we didn't have lives outside of him. It's like we're all toys in a toy box, and we only come to life when he's ready to interact with us. It was exactly like that. My ex was always weird and emotionally stunted. He had never come out of his shell or let anyone in, which was a big problem to the relationship, but that's just the background. One day we were at our friend's house, and the conversation turned to creepy and weird things. He brought up the dark web and said something about a YouTube channel that discussed weird things that could be found on the dark web. Then he asked if we'd heard of crushing, and the look on his face and his tone told me that this was more than a casual inquiry. It seemed like he was gauging us for our reaction to see if we were into crushing. We asked what it was, and he said that it was videos of women in stiletto heels crushing things like small animals, filmed from below through glass and the like. It was oddly specific. And still his tone and careful considering expression told me he was hyper-aware of our reaction. When we reacted negatively to that being a thing, he immediately switched gears and started laughing like, "I know, right? How could anyone be into that?" When I finally did break things off, we had a heart-to-heart about all the ways our relationship had deteriorated. He was able to admit that he'd never let me in because he was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle it. But I think it may have been at least partially related to that crushing conversation, among other things. Oof. This one won't be crazy or frightening, but I remember the point at which I recognized sociopathy in my ex. We sat down on his bed one night, and I asked him to tell me things about himself. Because even though we were dating, I felt like I knew nothing about him. He couldn't give an answer beyond surface level on any emotional topic. I looked in his eyes and I saw nothingness. I realized why I could never emotionally read him or get any sort of feel. He did tell me after we broke up that he can't feel emotions and how much it sucks. I didn't understand this until much later. Before we dated, I remembered him telling me how manipulative he was with a smile. He lied constantly about everything and had 15 other relationships before me, all ending within a month. Yes, an obvious red flag that I ignored. He'd jump from religion to atheism every other month. He'd repeat cycles over and over. He was known by everyone and liked by many. Very charming. He had a flirty personality. He loved risk-taking for no reason and always got into trouble. He set fire in the attic 3 times. Was disgusted by all animals and would try to do things to our cat whilst we weren't there or looking. Went out and bought a load of knives and swords and kept them in his bed. This guy turned to me, no emotion on his face, and said, "What's actually wrong with hurting people?" I never left a party that fast, and I was frightened as heck. I'm once again very glad that people like this are treatable and may be able to vent their more violent tendencies onto things like video games. Or maybe video games make them curious what the real thing is like. I frankly don't want to know, and after all the cat-related stuff, and the stuff I haven't actually been able to put in this video, I'll be very glad to see the back of this topic. There was this guy I was in a couple of clubs with in high school. He was always really polite, but intense. The sort of intense you didn't want to make direct eye contact with, if that makes any sense. Anyway, one day we were walking back from McDonald's or somewhere together before our club started. It was just the 2 of us, and out of nowhere he starts talking about how he's a black belt in some martial art, and gleefully tells me about how in one of his classes they'd just learned how to break someone's neck in one move, and how cool it was. I was like, okay then, that's interesting, and I just let him go on his merry way. In the back of my mind I was going, this guy is totally going to kill someone someday. Years later he makes the local news. Not for a murder, but for the unspeakable act. I don't have a specific moment that's odd, but I've got a friend who told me. She was schizophrenic and psychopathic. In layman's terms, she hears voices, and also she doesn't really quite understand, care, or feel other people's emotions. But what makes her a bit of an anomaly is that the voices in her head tell her to do good things, and how other people might be feeling. like tip a little extra, or your friend needs a hug right now, go help your coworker with their work, compliment the shoes, they're new, or even just you're doing just fine. She's quite interesting. What's the craziest reason you've had to fire an employee? Employee 1 wearing earplugs on a string. Employee 2 comes up behind Employee 1 and decides to yank on the string, which pulls earplugs out of ears very fast. This causes a vacuum in the ear canal and effectively pops your eardrums outward. It hurts real bad. Employee 1 got mad, yelled, and possibly cussed Employee 2. Employee 2 decides he doesn't like Employee 1's attitude about the situation. Employee 2, who's an amateur boxer, punches 1 to lay him out on the floor. Employee 2 is a marvelous piece of work. All that amateur boxing must have knocked the sense right out of his head. Before this incident, Employee 2 graced me with a conversation. Why he felt the need to say these things to me, I don't know. Maybe this lends legitimacy to the theory that he had the sense knocked out of his head. I think it just gives insight into a crappy human. Employee 2 was married and had a newborn or toddler. Apparently, his underage teen niece would babysit with another friend keeping company. Employee 2 indicated he thought both teens were hot and had a number of ideas about them that were extremely inappropriate. He slashed my tire after I told him to go to work instead of sitting in the break room. He obviously didn't want to go back to work, so I think you did him a favor. I gave my secretary a document that I wanted incorporated into a letter I had written, and she hucked the document like a frisbee into her trash can. It was literally my only copy, so I had to walk over and fish it out. That was her last day. What the frick? Man, you must have more stories. How did she interview? She was already there when I started. She worked for someone else but had problems with that person, so they tried putting her with me. Who would have thought she had problems with another person? Had an employee, a nurse, who was drinking on the job, snuck vodka in a plastic water bottle. We became suspicious when she began behaving erratically. Then we noticed that she was super possessive of her bottle and never let it leave her sight or let anyone else near it. She messed up and left it at her desk when she went to the bathroom. So we sniffed it and she was busted. Hot mess, that woman was. Almost identical to my story at my job. She had an irreplaceable water bottle. One day, in a downpour, she had to go out to her car to get her magic water bottle. Came back loaded and soaking wet. She never made it back to her desk. And here I am wondering if with that last sentence they mean that she was fired for being obviously loaded, or whether she didn't make it back to her desk because she hit on a coworker, tripped and fell and then spewed up in her handbag. I was part of a group of IT contractors together for a large international project. The client would get us apartments to live in at each implementation site for 6 to 12 months. A member of my team got into a disagreement with the CTO when he came to visit our site, which resulted in her screaming personal attacks at him in the hallway when he tried to step outside to de-escalate the argument. She was fired on the spot, but then proceeded to go back to the apartment provided by the company and completely wreck it. The site was in the middle of the desert, and she had opened all of the windows and doors, turned the AC on max, stopped all of the drains and turned the water on, threw red nail polish all over the bathroom. It was the most extreme breakdown in a professional environment I've ever seen. I never learned of any follow-up, i.e. legal action. I think because the CTO was embarrassed he had to ask us to check her apartment since he'd already left town. While I didn't fire her, I was offered the chance to work with her again 12 years later via anonymous reference, and obviously rejected her as a candidate. Think twice about burning that bridge, or at least how you do it. I once had an employee Snapchatting as he drove an ambulance with a crew member and patient in the back through an intersection during a red light. Rubbing a pregnant co-worker's belly 3 times after being asked to stop and then asking her if her husband was good at doing the deed. I fired him and he asked if we could still be friends. No. Then he tried to file for unemployment after only working there for 3 weeks, part-time. We had a similar guy like that in our company. He was only with us for about 2 months before it happened. We were having our annual Christmas dinner and he was putting his arms around one of the managers all night and grabbing her hand when she got up to leave for the bathroom or whatever and asking her where she was going. He wasn't even drunk and he was asked about 5 times to stop it before she actually shouted at him in the middle of the restaurant. Didn't see him around after that night. One of our delivery drivers was supposed to be training a new employee, basically driving around and introducing them to routes and customers and that kind of thing. Well, he told the new driver to just drop him off at the park down the street, and when my boss drives the 15 seconds to the park, he was doing smack with local homeless people. Literally doing smack with hobos at the park. So of course the dude got fired. Then maybe a month later, we get a call from a customer saying that he was walking in the middle of a busy intersection with our company's shirt on. Guy had a crush on a female coworker. He passed her a note at work one day with a gob of hand lotion inside it and the words, "I got really excited thinking about you earlier." The girl freaked out and went to management. The guy got escorted out. Had an employee pull a piece on me. This was after he got fired for threatening others at a Tier 1 help desk. Made everyone uncomfortable the entire time he was there. He's still in jail, it's been about 8 years now. I had an employee who got drunk on her lunch break, flipped her car, went to jail, mugshot with her company logo on her shirt. Perfect. Everyone is asking, our lunch break is 1 hour. Many employees leave to go out and eat. Potentially there were other substances involved. I work in pizza delivery, and we had a guy back in the day, fellow manager, who tried to shut down the store 5 hours before the time that corporate set for us to close. He clocked every person out and sent them home, and then just refused to take the phone calls or anything like that. He was fired immediately after our boss found out, and he even tried to come into work the next day like everything was fine. We used to do crap like that at my store once or twice a year. We always said the oven broke down or the power went out. No one bothered to check, and nobody ever got in trouble. We legitimately ran out of food multiple times and had to close because of it. I'd usually stay there and answer the phones because I think irate customers are the best thing ever. Picking up and telling them that everyone else is gone, I'm just there cleaning, and that we were completely out of everything on the menu, would usually get some sort of snarky, "Well, why did you pick up the phone?" kind of comment where I could just say, "To get it to stop ringing," and just wait for them to start cussing so I could hang up on them. Good God, I miss those days. As a former McDonald's employee, I can't imagine how on earth any of us would keep our jobs if we pulled some crap like this. I can't imagine any chain wouldn't be well regulated enough to stop this from happening under anything but the most extreme circumstances. I wasn't the manager, but watched the whole thing happen. A few years ago, I worked at a restaurant, and we had kind of an annoying new hire. One of those, "I'm too good for this" types. It was this kid's first job and first day out of training. One of his tables was a family with 2 small children who were being obnoxious, but hey, it's a family restaurant, that's expected. While walking away from the table, he muttered something along the lines of, "Shut up, you fricking kids." Except he didn't actually mutter, he spoke at normal volume. The mother overheard and was not pleased. He was sent home and invited not to return. "I'm gonna start inviting people to not come back to things. Congratulations, you've been invited to frick off." One of our warehouse workers was a young man about 25 years old. He was suspected of having a substance problem, mostly because of absenteeism and that he just seemed off at times. One day, he called our office manager from the back parking lot of our building and said that he had an upset stomach and had pooped his pants. She told him she would try to find a change of clothes to bring out to him, but before she could, he ran into the building and into the bathroom off the lobby, trailing his accident smeared on his shoes onto the floor. He then took off the crap-filled pants and left them in the bathroom and ran back outside to his car. At that point, everyone else in the small office was running outside to escape the horrible smell. Our office manager found a pair of pants in someone's locker and took them to where the guy was parked, but turned around when she saw him standing beside his car with no pants or underwear on. While everyone else was figuring out how to deal with the doo-doo in the office, the guy got in his car and left. He showed back up 3 days later as if nothing had happened. He was told to head back home. I could never figure out why he ran inside. If you crapped your pants, wouldn't you just get in your car and drive home? I once crapped in my pants on my way to work, had some chicken that didn't agree with me. This was the start of a very bad case of food poisoning. I just turned around and went home, called work and told them I had food poisoning. Paid my sister to use our carpet cleaner to clean my car seat. I don't trust my toots anymore. I'm not the manager involved, but I think this fits the bill. A coworker of mine who was a little bit too into his car got snapped doing twice the speed limit. Instead of pulling over for the patrol car behind him, he decided to run for it. He led a police chase to the office and shook them off by hiding in the underground parking. The GM watched it happen from his office. He took the lift down, found the coworker's car, and told him not to bother getting out. But did it clear his wanted level? Yeah, but the stupid motherfricker ran over a cop leaving the garage. He's gonna need to hit the paint shop. Eggplant pic on the office cloud storage. How did you go about identifying the culprit to fire him? Luckily, it wasn't my job to do, but if I recall correctly, they identified him from the computer used to log in. In the details on the file itself, the type of phone used to take the photo, and the directory the file was in. There's a chapter from Let's Pretend This Never Happened about the author having to learn how to ask, "Is this your eggplant?" with a straight face while working HR for a faith-based organization that apparently had a problem with folks using their company emails to send each other eggplant pics. It's fantastic. For extra fun, there's a line from that chapter as follows. "Are these your Johnsons?" I highly recommend getting the audiobook as read by the author, Jenny Lawson. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years back, a co-worker got into some trouble for something and got called into the owner's office. A few minutes later, you hear a huge thump. The idiot broke his hand on the boss's desk during their disagreement. He got a police escort off the property. Worked as a bartender at a restaurant. I was cashing out a waitress who decided to enter the bar to make herself a smoothie. After fumbling around, she dropped a wine glass from the hanger and it smashed all over the counter. I told her she's going to need to clean it up before I can finish cashing her out. She then begged me that she needs her tips right now as her friend who she owes money to is waiting outside and that she was going to deliver the money, come back and clean it up. She never came back and I had to replace all the ice and all the fruit garnishes on a busy weekend night because of broken bits of glass that landed all over it. Of course, the manager comes over to ask why the drink tickets are 10 minutes long and I told him what happened. They immediately went into the schedule and gave all her future shifts to other people. The waitress called the restaurant not even 5 minutes later to ask why her shifts had been forcibly given away, and the manager replied, "'Cause you're fired," and hung up. Had an employee pass out in his truck in a customer's driveway. Customers called me to report said employee had a glass pipe on his chest. Luckily, guy decides to call me instead of the sheriff. The employee was picked up and brought back to the shop. When asked what was going on, he stated, "I was on a break, it wasn't green herb, it was just spice." "Sorry, bud, I don't think this is going to work out." "Spice? Do you spice? Are you looking for the Suncut Bazaar?" I see you critters answering these stories and I love it. Let me know below if you understood the reference. Fired a guy in his first week for browsing and downloading adult flicks at work on his lunch break. On a computer in a large room that other people worked in, at a government organization. So caught him red-handed, warned him not to do that, already thinking this guy will be fired at the end of the day, but have to go through the channels, was a weekend shift, and then 2 hours later he does it again at the same place. At that point I had the VP's approval to just fire him, and we'll deal with the paperwork on Monday. Let him go, he's shocked but doesn't say much. Being the only manager on site, I take screenshots of the sites he's visited, forward it off to HR and the VP to document it all. A few days later, the guy's father calls the VP to complain about his son being fired. Guy was in his mid-20s. Apparently, the fired employee never thought him being fired on the day he was busted for browsing adult flicks on a government computer in a government office was the reason to be fired. And he never told his irate father about this. So the VP deals with this very diplomatically, saying employee was viewing inappropriate content at work, was warned, continued bad behavior. Father doesn't accept the explanation, so the VP starts reading off the list of sites that were visited. All of them were hardcore sites geared toward large African-American women. Fired employee was Caucasian. The real kicker to this was that the VP believed that the fired employee was listening in on his father's conversation via another phone. Just as the sites were being read off, there was a very audible click of that phone being hung up. My husband is a manager and his employee somehow had another employee's ID and then stole that person's check and cashed it. Caught it all on camera. She still denied it. In the legal field, that's called the shaggy defense. But we saw you sign the paper. It wasn't me. We even caught you on camera. It wasn't me. I hope this is a real thing between legal personnel. I had to send a guy to a remote gas and petroleum refinery site for an inspection. Previously, he had been reliable on most occasions. However, on this occasion, he never showed up for the pre-substance or alcohol test the day before he had to fly out and gave me a long-winded excuse, basically blaming his car troubles. At this point, I would have gone myself to the site, however, I was just back from a bone graft to my collarbone, so I wasn't going anywhere. The director made the final decision to send him anyway against my recommendations. We flew him to the site to do his on-site induction where he would do the D&A test anyway. Partway through his induction, he got up and left. I called him that night but never got an answer, so I checked his accommodation and the hotel claimed he had checked in within the last half hour. I was just glad nothing major had happened. Next morning I speak to the client and the client informs me that the staff member apologized for leaving abruptly and had to rush off and deal with some personal issues. I don't press it any longer. 2 hours goes by and I get a call from the client stating that they've kicked him off site because they've found him asleep on site, and when they woke him up, he became extremely aggressive. The client is furious about this and says we're a cowboy of an operation for sending someone like this and to fly someone up the next day to finish the job. That night, we have a conference call with the client stating that we were no longer going to be working for them due to this issue, costing our company roughly $1 million for the loss of the contract. We bring him the day after he flies back to ask about his actions. I'm supposed to head this up and get his side of the story, except before we even really get into discussing things, my director asks, "If we were to substance test you today, will you fail?" He answers, "Yes," and he's told he's being terminated instantly. He starts yelling at the top of his lungs and blaming his actions on everyone else. I told him he needs to leave straight away or police will get called. He does. He leaves then for the next month, and our admin receives emails about how I'm terrible at my job and I should be fired for not listening to his problems, which he had never spoken to me about. So yeah, that was the day I fired my brother and found out he was addicted to crystal. There was a lot going on post his termination, and me and my dad combined to pay for rehab costs. He never stayed both times he was sent. Then there was physical threats of attack to my mum and my family for not giving him money. That's where I cut contact. Every update since has been from my dad. He hasn't seen my mum. He's working during the day and studying at night. I hope this time he can do well. As for the services that our employer offered, previously he had been given aid for counseling due to depression. Out of those 12 sessions, he had gone to 3. The situation gave me some pretty severe anxiety and depression. You can blame the plot twist way that I've written this due to the fact that I've just watched season 1 and 2 of Black Mirror over the last few nights. In auto sales, one of our salesmen always seemed to be up to something. Between lying to all our customers, substance use, and constant fighting at home, he was impossible to manage. Unfortunately, he was the type that gave the rest of us a bad name. Eventually, he got into it with our GSM about several issues, and his go-to was to start making fun of our GSM's handicapped son. I had so much respect for our GSM, he took him in an office, told him he was terminated, and walked out, even though I know inside he was boiling with rage. I'm glad that guy's gone. And good riddance. Good gosh, did he want to be fired or something? It makes my mind spin that even if you harbor crappy opinions, you can somehow imagine that saying stuff like this won't get you fired. Not a manager, but I had to share my story. Worked at Jumbo Juice. Co-worker put bare hands into his pants and scratched his crotch at the register while helping a guest. When the guest commented, he put his fingers in the guest's face and said, "Smell it." "Smell that? That's the Jumbo." Wow. I had an officer under me. He was reported in a tree. I went to investigate the last place he was seen. He was still there, attempting to pepper spray birds. I wish I could have made that up. He was fired immediately. What's hilarious is that pepper spray has no effect on birds. They can't taste it and it doesn't irritate their eyes. I actually didn't know that. Good gracious. Put him below subpar. Maybe that's why he was trying to pepper spray birds. Maybe he had heard it somewhere and wanted to see if it was true. I own a tree removal service. Hired a guy as a ground worker. He worked great the first 2 weeks, didn't complain, seemed to know the work, and I paid him well. The third week working for me, we did a job that consisted of 2 big box elders to be removed. It was 95 degrees that day. I told the guys, don't push yourselves too much, make sure you're getting enough fluids, and if you need a break, take one. The new guy drove his own vehicle to the job as he needed to leave that day 40 minutes early to make it to a dental appointment. We're like 40 minutes into the job and I notice he's moving really slow. Just looked really unmotivated and like he didn't want to be there. We had the customer's driveway blocked off with brush everywhere. At this point, I'm still climbing in the tree and I see the new guy driving through the customer's yard, which was like 2 acres, and then onto the road in a serious hurry. I called him probably 30 times to make sure everything was all right. Didn't hear back from him. My other employees had no idea and were in shock. They saw him hop in his truck and just dart. He decided right then and there, frick this, and just left. Still haven't heard from him to this day. I didn't terminate him. That's the closest I would have come to firing someone. I don't know if I would have fired him if he'd showed up again the next day, but he would have had to do some pretty good explaining with a sincere apology for not letting anyone know and having the rest of the guys pick up the slack. My construction company was building a new addition on a hospital. One morning, the president of the hospital called to inform me that he had just watched one of our laborers doing smack in his truck while on break. Went to the job site, talked to the kid. He said, "Yeah, but I waited till break time." You aren't supposed to drive your personal vehicle to the job site for liability reasons. Oh yeah, and you're not supposed to do smack, even on a break. We've had some winners over the years, but that kid took the cake. This was definitely one of those situations that was not funny when it happened, but is hilarious now. One employee was dealing white snow from the back door. Another was high on smack and nodding off while standing over a fryer. Another went off on an admittedly rude customer and got real mean. "Your wife must be sorry she married you." One called me an N-word, I'm white, and spat at me when I confronted him about the fact that his dad came in to say hi to him when he was out of work because his dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And one just sat in the dining room and refused to go back to work because a hockey game was on TV. Restaurant management is fun. I was a blacksmith at a federal historical site and I used to make nails as a demonstration. I didn't see this, but another blacksmith was making nails and a lady remarked, "They didn't have nails back then, 17th century, to which the blacksmith replied, "Yeah, right, lady, they scotch-taped Christ to the cross." What terrible specimens have you had to endure for roommates? 3 weeks before I was to move out of a place, my replacement moved in. My roommate had apparently told her it was okay. So now 3 people lived in an apartment meant for 2. From what I could tell, all she did was sit on the couch and watch TV. A week before I was to move out, a friend of mine came over to help me pack. Apparently, the replacement thought I was moving out that day and that she could finally move into my room instead of sleeping in a common area. When she found out that wasn't the case, she got upset with my friend. Over the next week, she asked me repeatedly, "So when are you moving out?" I told her it would be at the end of the month because I couldn't move into my apartment until then. She said I should move out sooner. What I think happened is my roommate told her I was moving out the prior month and that I was overstaying my welcome. FYI, your former roommate was collecting double rent. That's usually pretty illegal. Mine told me not to bring my friends over because Asian people made her uncomfortable. One roommate would leave the house without their keys, not because they forgot them, but because he didn't like having keys. Ever. The request was to stop locking the door when I left the house. This is the second time I've read this. Like, do these people want to be robbed? I'll never trust someone like this. I feel like it's an elaborate plot to steal your stuff. Leave the door unlocked when you go out. Okay. And then they take your stuff with their friends. When I was in the dorms in college, I roomed with this dude who I didn't know. The guy played football and was about 300 plus pounds. Well, the problem is he wouldn't shower. Ever. Like no fricking joke. Our room smelled like hot mayonnaise and BO. I would spray and clean. Well, eventually, I got noseblind. This mother fricker finally got a girl to come to the room. When she asked him why it stank, I heard him whisper, "It's him." I fricking blew up. I asked old girl whose side looked like it would stink. My side was spotless, while his was full of half-eaten food and sweaty clothes. She ended up agreeing and leaving. The only cleaning he did was when he would come home from practice, take off his sweaty clothes, and then proceed to Febreze them and then go and take a nap. Luckily, the room was really big. Finn. I died inside when you said it smelled like hot mayo. You have my utmost sympathy as someone who hates mayo with every fiber of my being. And that guy sounds like a fricking douche. I probably couldn't live with the gentleman in question here, and frankly, I don't understand how anyone could. Surely there's someone you can go to and complain in the dorm situation like this. She told me I needed to stay somewhere else overnight because her new boyfriend was staying for the first time. I said if she had given me more notice, then I could maybe have sorted something, but she had told me 2 hours before I needed to leave. So what did you do? I told her I'd go out for some food, then when I came back I was happy to stay in my room. She shouted a lot about how unreasonable I was being, but that was still what I did. My freshman year in college, he insisted on having 2 box fans placed in our window, one facing in, one facing out, in order to circulate the air. Seems like no big deal, right? Until you realize that he insisted they be on full power every night of the year. Didn't matter if it was 100 degrees outside or -10. My bed was the closest to the window, and if I tried to get up to turn them off, he'd get hostile as frick. Frick that guy. Shove one fan up his butt and the other down his throat to circulate the air. 1% evil, 99% hot air. I use window fans, still do, even in January. I love and need very cold, moving air while sleeping. Sophomore year, my best friend at college really wanted to room with me. I knew my cold air thing would be a problem because every other girl I've ever met likes it very hot in their room, like 70+ degrees Fahrenheit. Like my freshman roommate kept it at 90 degrees plus, and she would crack the window to keep the radiators going at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just horrible. Anyway, so I knew this would be a problem. I told my friend no, I wanted to live alone. She insisted she loved to sleep with window fans too, she loved the cold, blah blah blah. She kept asking for weeks. Eventually I said yes to rooming with her, with the clear understanding that I'd be using my window fan all year. Well, we roomed together and I used my fan, and January rolled along with frigid temperatures. My friend suddenly stopped speaking to me. I would ask her what's wrong and she didn't answer. She acted like I didn't exist. This lasted a couple of months before I remembered she had told me she had a blog. I looked up her blog and saw many posts dating back months complaining about what an awful person I am for freezing her to death with my window fan and how much she hates me for it. I was pretty surprised because she had never said anything. As soon as I read the blog, I asked her about it and she flipped out, went to the dean saying I'd invaded her privacy for reading her blog, and asked to be moved to a different room. She moved out and she never spoke to me again. So anyway, similar story to yours. I hope I wasn't the butthole here. I also wrote her a nice, long Facebook message right before graduation wishing her well, telling her what I admired about her and how she'd do great in life, and apologizing for losing her friendship sophomore year, but she never wrote back. I'm still puzzled. The fact that there is someone out there who can think they are rationally calling you the bad guy and hate you for this really concerns me. What the frick? When you repeatedly warn someone about it, they do it, and find out you're right, someone is a butthole and it isn't you. I have the master bedroom with the bathroom, and pay $65 more a month for this. My roommate, whose room is on my side of the house, gets to use my bathroom because we agreed he could. He lets his one-night stands and drunk friends walk through my room when I'm not there to use that bathroom, rather than the other one closer to the front door. I'm now missing 2 phone chargers and a pair of $100 headphones, but I'm missing them because I must have misplaced them. Can you buy a lock for your door? After that, our agreement would change. Not really a roommate, but a little stepbrother. He's 12. He wants to rotate beds from week to week. So I sleep in my bed, then the next week my stepbrother's bottom bunk, then the next week his top bunk. I don't want to sleep in either one of your beds, that's why it's called my bed. Just go to sleep. Explain to him that your sheets are full of your dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why he shouldn't want to sleep in your bed. Then explain that his bed is full of his dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why it's gross of him to ask you to sleep there. Well, now I don't even want to sleep in my bed. On move-out day, my sophomore year of college, I was cleaning my half of the dorm room. Mind you, the room had been a mess before. Both me and my roommate were very messy people, so the mess itself didn't bother us much. So cleaning my half took quite a while. But by the end of it, all of my stuff was packed in my car and I was ready to go. When I was done, my roommate said, "I'll have my stuff packed up in about an hour." I asked her why she was telling me that, and she said it was so I could finish cleaning. I took one look at her, set down the bag of cleaning supplies, and said, "Here's all the stuff you need." Then I turned in my key and left. Like heck I'm going to stay behind an hour later than I needed to mop the floor and clean the surfaces of your side of the room, when you did jack all to help me. Handed me $50 while asking me to get them green herb while they owed me $700 in back rent. Now they owe you $650 and still need green herb. Had a roommate in college who refused to take his keys with him when he went out to the bar because he didn't want a lump in his pocket. He would then come home after everyone else was already asleep, and when the doors were locked, he would start pounding on the door and shouting, "This is bullcrap! I frickin' live here!" until he woke someone up and got them to go downstairs and let him in. Oh, frick me, that would not fly. Oh, he would though, right down the fricking stairs. Yep, for me, the net result of that situation would be the purchase of some noise-cancelling headphones and a grumpy flatmate the next morning, because there's no way I'm getting up on a regular basis for a moron like that. Oh, I had a neighbor like that in a building once. At least once a week, for more months than I can remember, he had come home drunk in the wee hours, beating on his door and screaming until his roommate let him in. One night he was so drunk he decided pulling the fire alarm was the best way to get his roommate to open the door. I wasn't invited to the blanket party that was held for him by some of the other building residents after he did that, but he moved out very quickly afterwards. What's a blanket party? When a group of people beat someone with bars of soap and a blanket, it's usually used on someone who's hampered or held back or teed off an entire group. It's a percussive attitude adjustment tool. We had several rooms and one was huge, meant for 2 or 3 people. It had a sink and 2 walk-in closets. After signing the lease, she announced that she needed the giant room to herself because she had PTSD and OCD. She wouldn't explain herself any further and threw a passive-aggressive tantrum for a month when we refused to cram ourselves into the 2 tiny rooms with 4 people so that she could have the big one to herself. We told her that she could be in the big room with another roommate, but she didn't want that. She just chose the small room eventually. We never heard the end of it either. It was always our fault that she was late to school because she didn't have a private bathroom and crap. Before you ask, yes, this person was in therapy, but according to her, she was in therapy because she needed to learn to be selfless and put herself first. She had frequently used that as an excuse to be selfish. My therapist thinks I need to put myself first. I roomed with another girl that was like this, but at least it was just me and her. She claimed because of her OCD and obsessive shopping, she needed a bigger room with the private bathroom and large closet. So I got the small room and shared the bathroom with guests and her, since it was closer to the living room and everyone used it if they were over. Since she used that bathroom too, I had to maintain it to a very high cleanliness standard for her. Meanwhile, her private bathroom was a pigsty. I had to pay 50-50 rent to get a much smaller room and share a bathroom. I was out of there when the lease ended the following year. Mental illness isn't an excuse to be a jerk. Ugh, I agree. It's an insult to the millions of mentally ill people who are perfectly nice and considerate. Your roommate sounds terrible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a roommate who moved out without warning about 2 months before my lease was up. She pretty much disappeared and left most of her stuff in the apartment. She also didn't pay up for her remainder of the rent. 3 years later, I get a phone call from her. I'm living 1,500 miles away and have been in several different apartments in several different states during the interim. She says I need to ship all of her furniture and belongings immediately. What do you mean you dragged everything out to the curb the week after I left? You're a terrible roommate. You owe me for the value of my things. I stopped answering her calls and eventually she gave up. I would have sold them all. Well, her stuff wasn't even that nice. Mine was adamant that I tried doing the deed with him. For clarification, I'm a straight guy and I didn't know he was gay. He said that I might like it, but I'd never know if I didn't try it. I've had that phrase used on me too, from my best friend at the time. How do you know you're not gay if you've never done anything gay? How did you react? I kinda froze up and stammered something about how painful it would be without lube. Then I left. I don't think his family thinks much of me anymore because I didn't visit him in hospital a couple of months later when he was in a coma. I don't think they know their son wanted me to top him either, so I don't blame them for being mad at me. I'd planned to spend my birthday evening quietly reading and watching Italian murder mysteries. Roommates announced that I needed to go make plans because they were having friends over and didn't want it to be awkward. The friends they were inviting were always so incredibly rude to me. So I smiled and said, sure, I'll make plans, and invited 3 of our neighbors and half of my creative writing class to eat cake and watch Italian murder mysteries. My crappy roommates had to go to their friend's apartment instead. He was a germaphobe and a bit stupid. He wanted all the other housemates to completely scrub the tub with cleanser after we took a shower, so he wouldn't come into contact with butt wash water or something else. We laughed at him and told him he could disinfect the tub himself before he showered if he was so worried. If someone has a problem like that, I'd happily spray down the shower after use. Just a small thing, but fricking scrubbing the entire bathtub? Frick that. Not me or any roommate situation I've had, but you know when you've had a friend complain about something and you only hear their side of the story? If you still think they're wrong, they must be extra wrong, right? My friend told me that her roommate forgot his keys at home one night. This sucks because he works late. He rings the doorbell, she wakes up all angry, opens the window and says, "Oh, that's too bad, but it's late. Go back to your office and sleep." Rather than just accept his apology and open the door, she told him to go back to his workplace, sleep there, and just come home some other time. She was telling me this story as if I'd be like, wow, the nerve of this guy trying to come home. Instead, my initial reaction was, man, that's freaking annoying that he woke you up, which very quickly changed to, what the whole frick is wrong with you though, by the end of the story. Not yet a roommate, but started making outrageous demands. There was a time I was leasing out the spare bedroom of my home and there were a few weird, crazy requests I got. An elderly lady thought the room for rent also included me taking care for her as a caregiver and driving her around. She also demanded I install ADA ramp on my porch. A couple who was so sure I would select them as a roommate, I told them of my no pets policy, went to my yard and started to plan out how they plan to fence off a section for their doggy. Hello lady, this is my home. They got mad when I told them I was turning down their application. FYI, I have nothing against dogs, I have cats that happen not to play well with others, hence the no pet policy. Had an actual roommate that refused to pay the bill because she was broke and would close the door on me and expected me to pay for her part. Yet she was out all night partying and getting expensive weaves. She left her email open at my PC and I saw the cost. Told her I can't pay her part and she'll get evicted if the rent is not paid on time. She left a week later. You'd think the crazies would have it in their best interest to hide their eccentricity right up until the move-in. In my experience, that's what they usually do anyway. I moved into our first 3-person dorm room, so I picked the prime bed. None of us knew each other before this, we were all in a bind for housing, and lo and behold, she and her family shows up and gives me the stink for having the gall to take the good bed. I get along really well with my other roommate, but this girl started using all of our stuff and staring at us when we slept or did homework. We got ants because she never cleaned the kitchen, but she would hide dirty plates and bad food in the back of the very deep pantry instead of cleaning or throwing it away. She wouldn't let us have friends over but felt the need to talk loudly on the phone at all hours. I lost it when she left a pair of sweatpants on the floor of our shared closet with actual crap in them. We searched for a different room for her and made her move out. I still have the hate letter she wrote me the day after she left. I met my first roommate on Craigslist. First red flag, I guess. I wasn't allowed to keep my music above volume 10 after 9 or 10 p.m. She, however, sang gospel songs loudly in the living room until 4 or 5 in the morning. Every single day. I had to open my mail in front of her, otherwise she'd open it because it looked important. Aside from this being totally illegal, why the frick do you need to read my bank statements? She'd text me when I got Amazon packages. Oh, your shoes got here. Because she'd open it and dig around before I got a chance to. She never cleaned, as in her mother still came over every weekend to clean her bedroom and bathroom. She had let her trash accumulate near her spot on the couch throughout the week. Clearly didn't give a crap about her living environment, but God forbid I put the television remote anywhere besides the right arm of the couch. I wasn't allowed to turn the heat on in the winter. To save money. I live in the mountains of North Carolina and the winters are pretty harsh. She would rather freeze than pay an extra $15 per month. Over the summer, though, I wasn't allowed to open the windows, so no one breaks in. My apartment was either in the 50s, 60s, or the 80s. She didn't like it when I used the kitchen to cook, strange, but she would hand wash her period panties in the kitchen sink, even though we each had a private bathroom. Frick you, Rebecca. I had one roomie announce one day that he was going to stop paying his share of the rent. I explained that no rent equals no room. He thought that was unreasonable and went around telling people I was cold. What a butthole. He wanted his girlfriend to move in rent-free. This girl used my cookware and never cleaned it. She took forever in the shower. We put an end to that real quick. My current roommate. I own the house and did a buttload of work to clean out the garage so I could turn it into a man cave. He did absolutely jack to help and most of the work was cleaning up piles of recycling he never took out. Now it's cleared he wants to park his car in there. But there's actual stuff taking up half the garage, so he would only be able to park in there while the other roommate and I park on the street and not use the driveway so that he can get in and out. He thinks I'm being unfair by not letting him park in there. Also, he cooks and never cleans, and has more than once let leftovers rot in my Tupperware and then thrown it out instead of cleaning it and not replaced it. This happens every time I move in with someone. Every single time. They tell me I don't do any dishes ever, which is very true. What I have to keep reminding them is that I have one plate, one bowl, one fork, one knife and one spoon. Keep them in my room at all times. Always wash them immediately after I'm done using them and bring them right back into my room. Always hilarious to hear their response. Listen guys, I have one single cup that I drink from every single day. I wash it before I fill it up for the day. I wash my pots and pans right after I'm done cooking and my plates and silverware after I eat. The other 14 dirty glasses on the counter and sink full of week-old dishes are yours, and I'm not fricking washing them for you. I absolutely hate when people rotate who does the dishes, and then your dumb as frick roommates manage to use 4 glasses, all the pots and pans, and every available piece of silverware in like 5 hours. What in the holy frick are you cooking that makes so many pots and pans? Had an actress roommate who on random Saturdays and Sundays said she needed the entire apartment to herself to study her lines. I rarely had anyone over to begin with, as I was usually out and about, but this particular Sunday there were like 4 of us in the living room watching Mythbusters. I only include this to show that it's not like we were watching NFL and screaming or shouting or being drunk. She legitimately thought this was not okay and that everyone else should leave to accommodate her. Anyone who thinks like this should live by themselves. I'll never understand how people who want to split costs to save money still think people should accommodate them. When I have roommates, I realize that if I want peace and quiet, I sometimes need to remove myself and go to the library or something. That's the price you pay to save money. It wasn't my roommate's unreasonable demand, but it was my roommate thinking my request was an unreasonable demand. My roommate and I rented a house together and the garage was pretty close to the living room. One day I was watching TV when I heard what sounded like something smashing into the garage. I waited a few seconds and went outside to see that my roommate had hit the garage with his truck and was chilling in his car texting. His car was still touching the garage. I told him to back up and he got really upset that I'd asked him to do that. Luckily, the damage was minimal, but what the frick, man? When I was a freshman in college, I lived in a dorm suite with 4 other girls, 3 single rooms and 1 double, which I shared with a roommate. One of the girls who lived in the single rooms was a real piece of work. Every slight change in the suite would drive her nuts, and she'd always be knocking on our door demanding an explanation for some minute thing or another. One time she knocked on my door only to show me a tiny scrap of ham and a piece of cereal pinched between her fingers. There was meat and cookie crisp on the kitchen floor. "Is this yours?" "Yes," I said. "You can throw those away." I also came home to her crying in the living room once because of another of our suite mates put a monster poster on the front door for a Halloween decoration, and it scared her. I guess those things don't sound too crazy out of context, but she'd knock to tell me she'd moved my food from the table to the counter and just general tiny stuff like that. Very strange. How have your real-life love triangles played out? None of us ended up with any of us, and a whole new set of friends had to be found. Had a thing with a guy, he proceeds to kiss best friend. I forgive them both, they proceed to make out in secret, and got to the point where he asked her to go to bed with him. They cracked and told me again. This had not been the first time something like this had happened with my friend. Needless to say, he no longer had a love interest after that, and I lost a crappy friend, which I guess is a win in the end. I've never understood the whole go after a friend's significant other thing. I once had a former boyfriend's roommate hit on me after we'd broken up, and even that felt weird and off-putting. Oh, I've got one. Dated a guy, really liked him. Maybe was reaching love levels. He then cheats on and dumps me for another girl. Great. Literally the next week, his best friend, who was not at all my type, was messaging me and was reassuring me that my ex told him he would be perfect for me and encouraged him to try to date me. I cut them both out of my life so fast. I had a friend in high school who'd always try to hit on or steal my significant others, even if she didn't like them at all. She just didn't want me getting all the attention. She even did it with new friends. Had a best friend since college who was always hawking on my boyfriends. Then I decided to switch things up and date a woman. She flirted with her too. Then I realized it wasn't just about competing. There was some strange thing she had for me, or against me. I could never figure it out. Anyway, we're not friends anymore, but we are cordial when we see each other. The female competition thing really bums me out. 3 of my friends and I all liked the same girl. They would hit on her. I instead befriended her older and very protective brother. I got the girl. Did he befriend the brother solely to win the girl? No, he's actually a super interesting guy in his own right. A very successful entrepreneur who has worked in the most dangerous countries on earth doing absolutely insane crap, i.e. selling helicopters in Brazil or protecting coal ships from pirates. What the frick is that dude's job title? Ron Swanson. Color me pleasantly surprised that he genuinely befriended the guy to be a pal, and not just to use him in a sort of male-dominated medieval family dynamic to get approval to court his sister. I worked offshore. I knew I was going to be gone for a few months. Girlfriend said she wanted to wait since I was such a great guy. I came back and she was the same number of months pregnant that I had been gone. We'd always used protection, so I was skeptical but supportive. She had the kid and it was a different race than either of us. She admitted that while I'd been gone, she had had another boyfriend, then added that she was still seeing him. Acted like it was completely normal, as if it would have been crazy for her to stay alone like she'd offered to. DNA test? Not mine. Nope, the F out. Other guy goes to prison a few months later. Rumor mill says he was a mean-tempered and bullying spouse. She stalked me for decades, called my parents to find me, called my grandparents to find me. I'd see her around town and she would start following me and begging me to give her another chance. I eventually moved 700 miles away. She still calls, unlisted numbers to this day because of her. She gets the number from family or friends. Last I heard, she has 3 kids with 3 dads, never had a job, 2 of the dads in prison. I'm her one that got away. In some ways, I do feel sad for her. She's had a rough life. According to her, I was the only guy who treated her well. If she'd reciprocated, who knows? Our romance was in 1996. I got a message from her on Facebook last month. I didn't reply. Man, if she had applied half of that drive and persistence into developing stable relationships with a good guy that returned her interest, she'd have a great life right now. Well, I mean, technically, she's trying to do that. My dude dodged a tsunami with that girl. Was dating a guy, he confessed to one of his best friends that he liked her. She rejected him. Was mad because I was second choice, but forgave because frick my life. He still likes her and she messes with him. They fight because she doesn't want me around. They become friends again, I dump him. He admits to never loving me and was in it for the act of a relationship. Now he's all over her and she still plays him. I'm here sad because I loved him. Rest in peace, me. I hope you feel better. I know exactly how it feels to be used. I always wonder what people are thinking when they pull this crap. It will get better, I promise you. Keep on keeping on, friend. Was being manipulated by a guy 7 years older than me. He was gaslighting me and stringing me along. His girlfriend and baby mama knew about me, but stayed with him and blamed me for everything. I eventually cut him off and they got married. She messaged me on Facebook about a year ago, asking if we'd slept together while they were married. I hadn't, and she apologized for putting everything on me. It was unfair for her to do because I was so young, 19 when it started, and he was manipulating me and taking advantage of how naive I was. She explained that she had kicked him out and was beginning divorce proceedings because I wasn't the only one he cheated on her with, and he continued to cheat on her after they were married, including with her next-door neighbor. We ended up talking and laughing over what a scumbag loser he is, and laughing over the fact that we fell for his crap. I recently messaged her to ask how the divorce turned out. It's over, she came out on top, and me and her are friendly now. I was in college and I really liked this college guy in one of my classes. We instantly hit it off and became great friends. I really liked him. I was head over heels and he knew it. He was still hung up on his ex-girlfriend, but we fooled around from time to time. A guy from my high school kept asking me out and I kept turning him down. He wasn't my type, but we remained friends. All of my friends were telling me to give high school guy a chance, but I wanted college guy. I got super sick and texted college guy asking if he could take me to the hospital. He never replied, but I know he read it. So I texted high school guy and he was at my apartment in 10 minutes and even offered to pay my copay because I was flat broke at the time. I did pay him back. After that happened, college guy wouldn't talk to me for a while and like an idiot I kept going after him. I was super heartbroken. High school guy helped me through it. Finally, I decided to give him a shot. Now we're married and about to celebrate our 7-year anniversary with our 3-year-old son. When you say he wasn't your type, what specifically do you mean by that? Seems like he was your type after all. Not the original writer, but I do have a similar story of giving the other guy a chance and it working out. Me and the significant other are going on 5 years. My significant other was not my type. At the time. I figured it out once I started dating him and that what I thought was my type wasn't really my type. Don't knock it until you try it sort of thing. Hey, at least the high school guy's patience paid off. What a truly nice gentleman. All 3 of us now hate each other with the fury of 1,000 suns and wouldn't particularly care if the other 2 died of Lou Gehrig's disease. So not too bad, all things considered. I included the simple summary of a love triangle just because it seems like a concise summary of how the majority of these things have to play out. This is a story of a love square versus a love triangle, but it's pretty crazy. I had been living together with my girlfriend for maybe 6 months, together for maybe a year. She cheated pretty bad, but I don't know the depths of it. But at least 2 guys. She would tell me how much she loves me every 30 seconds, which made me believe that she was loyal. She didn't discuss other men, not as friends or anything, all silence. I'm not the jealous type at all, so I normally just trust and assume it's all good until it isn't. Nobody got caught, she just secretly planned to move in with one of the guys and surprise moved out one day. Not such a great feeling coming into an empty home. Took years to even learn of what transpired. She'd had a tough childhood and always told people the gruesome story of her mum dying at the hands of her father, with specifically her mum's eye dangling from the socket. Fast forward 1.5 years and I'm living with a new girlfriend and I share the eye dangling story and a light bulb goes off in her head. We piece together what happened. When I was living with cheating girlfriend, we had some drama. She had broken up with me, got with a guy, then came back to me, in addition to other trust-eroding issues, so I was basically not interested in doing the deed with her due to a lack of trust. Cheating girlfriend apparently was sleeping with the boyfriend of what would be my girlfriend in 1.5 years. Boyfriend of future girlfriend says, "Oh hey, I know this girl, she's had a tough life," and tells the whole mum dying story with specifically the dangling eye, which is how we figured it out, and goes on, "She needs a place to stay, can she stay with us?" She's worried her roommate is going to commit the unspeakable act against her. My future girlfriend calls him out that he's cheating with her, since he has a history of cheating and he admits it, so obviously she did not stay with them. Honestly, the cheating I don't mind as much as calling me a roommate and the potential unspeakable act committer when I thought I was in love with this girl, claiming to be my girlfriend and wanting to settle down with me. In conclusion, my girlfriend at the time had an ex-boyfriend that cheated on her with the girl I was seeing who cheated on me. Also, before I'd met my girlfriend at the time, apparently I'd had a dalliance with her childhood best friend. Had no idea. I didn't actually do anything wrong since that predated our relationship, but I still feel like a jerk about it between those two sordid bits of history. My bedroom life included maybe 5 people in a period of 2 years, and 3 of them are all intertwined like this. It's crazy. Kinda related, but my Aunt Janet was cheated on by my Uncle John with a girl Kate. Kate was cheating with John on her husband Brandon. Now Kate and John are getting married, and Janet and Brandon are getting married. Basically, they switched partners. All fake names, of course. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on a work contract on location. I met a guy, started dating, and things were good. One day, he told me his ex was going to be in town for a day and then they were going to hang out. That night, we were supposed to meet for drinks at the pub, and he was super distant and acting strange. It was obvious to me that he'd hooked up with her. He ended up leaving early to go to bed, alone. I was teed off. There was another guy also working for the company who'd always flirted with me. I happened to literally run into him as I'm headed outside to the balcony. Maybe it was something I was giving off, but he grabbed me and kissed me, and I went with it, and we ended up hooking up that night on the balcony, which also happened to be the place me and the first guy hooked up the first time. The next day, Guy 1 confesses that he hooked up with his ex. I told him I could tell and kind of left it at that. We just started hanging out less, and I started seeing a lot more of Guy 2. One day, it was quite apparent that they both weren't talking to me. They had talked. I rode up the elevator with one of their co-workers one day who told me that they were both upset that I'd hooked up with both of them in the same location, which frankly, I still think is silly. They ended up making friends, but I was out of the picture. Last week of my contract rolls around, and one particular party night, Guy 1 is giving me a lot of attention. Guy 2 also sees this going on. I end up leaving with Guy 1. At my place, the phone rings, and it's Guy 2, and he asks to speak to Guy 1. They're both from the same country, so they end up having some long drawn-out conversation that I don't understand. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's Guy 2. He asks to come in. I let him, and they both proceed to start kissing me and removing my clothes. That was a good night. Not so much a love triangle as a love V, but here's how it went. I liked this girl had a boyfriend, but was bi-curious and into me. She asked her boyfriend if experimenting with me was okay. He said it was okay so long as he was involved too. Me being 21 and having a bad case of the feelings, I agreed to this. It lasted maybe a month and it was really awkward. It ended up with me breaking up with them, but those two staying together. After that, I decided I'm not into guys at all and I would rather not repeat that experience. I don't talk to that pair much anymore, but I think they're married now. Yeah, I think most of the love triangles in my life that I've run into could be described as love Vs, i.e. one sad loser on the side has a crush on one of the parties. Luckily, there are a couple of true love triangles to help us fulfill the question in this video's heading. A few years back, I had hernia surgery and was on bed rest for a few days. One night, out of nowhere, an old fling hit me up telling me she was in the neighborhood. I was ecstatic at hearing her voice because she was one of the most beautiful, intelligent, and successful people I knew, and I always admired her. She ended up coming over and taking care of me, and we hit it off way better than before. I didn't know it at the time, but she was dating this guy since forever and was even living with him. When I found out, I told her I was going to be seeing other people too. We still ended up seeing each other for a few months, and eventually she had to tell him that she had cheated on him with me. He wanted her to stay even after we spent a weekend at my cabin. She stayed with the other guy because he was a safe option and she needed a place to stay. I couldn't promise her anything because I felt like I couldn't trust her and she didn't like the fact that I was dating other people. In reality, we were in a relationship and I saw other people as a way to not think about her living with her boyfriend. The whole thing was a crappy situation because we were madly in love with each other, but because of our trust issues, we ended up breaking it off. I ended up in a relationship with someone else for like a month. We never really talked since then. She married that guy a few months after I married my wife. She still calls at night from time to time, but I never answer because I'm happily married and I don't need that kind of trouble in my life. Don't want to be intrusive, but no other way to ask. Does your wife know? How does she feel about this? No, I never really considered it worth mentioning. Prefer to let sleeping dogs lie. Ha, wise move. Was a few years ago, and I'm currently still with one of them. My ex-boyfriend was manipulative and an emotional bully, not to mention pushed me into physical things that I didn't want to do. His influence caused me to begin working at Olive Garden while during my sophomore year at college, which led to the entrance of my current significant other. My ex was cheating with multiple girls via text over a period of months. Each time I confronted him resulted in a tearful plea of, "I'll change, I love you so much, I can't bear hurting you," after it occurred. After half a year of this, I'd virtually numbed myself to his pleas, but was too afraid of what I'd lost, my virginity, to give up the relationship. Instead, I acted as his transportation since his parents were unreliable and he was trying to finish his high school diploma. He was 1.5 years younger than me. So at Olive Garden, I never expected to find anyone else because of the restaurant environment and was not actually looking for anyone else. My ex also joined working there after quitting a nearby restaurant. He was absolutely crap at his job as a host, often infuriating the managers with his stupidity and lack of common sense. Eventually, I noticed another guy who I called a better and more mature version of the ex, but I was not planning on leaving at that time. My current significant other was sarcastic, aloof from everyone else, and mysterious, which of course attracted me, but I still had some attachment to the ex because I was fiercely loyal to a fault. I regret how I handled the falling out and transition to my current significant other because I did not cut off the ex like most people would have, and how I know I should have. Slowly, I developed an admiration for my SO and felt butterflies in my stomach whenever he was near. It was not a linear upward progression in our initial stages of relationship because even though he hated my ex, he respected the boundaries of a relationship. This changed, however, when he began to realize I was interested in him, and he felt as though he might rescue me from this jerk. I too looked at him as a rescuer. The ex began to notice his attention in me and that his presence was often near me, causing him to purposefully be a butt by leaving dirty dishes on my significant other's table, making inflammatory comments to him, and entering the area whenever he saw SO and I near each other. This became a sort of tango around the restaurant. I knew the ex became agitated by seeing me near my SO, so I would increasingly be around him and then disappear when the ex came into the area. I would still drive him places, but when he prompted me to confirm he and I were in a relationship, I would deflect and never answer straightly. One lonely night, I was texting my SO and he invited me to his apartment to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie. I gladly went and watched the movie with him, but nothing else happened because he was not the type to push, and I had been extremely damaged by the ex's advances to the point where I would later tremble just laying in the same bed as my SO, as a result of my ex. Our texting grew more frequent while I became more dismissive and numb toward the ex. I feared for my SO's safety because my ex is genuinely psychopathic and seemed to blame him for taking me away from him. One night driving my ex home, I knew I had to end it. He was sobbing and wanted me to hold him, but I couldn't stand touching him as I knew it was over. I had to carefully word my sentences so that he would finally leave my damn car. Then one night I found out the ex was stalking my SO. He had followed him to the apartment, which scared me to death knowing he was immature and prone to reactivity. Shortly after, as I left the SO's apartment to go home and had stopped off at a Wendy's drive-thru, my ex pulled up in his truck next to me and rolled down the window, grinning. He then pulled out a military-style knife and informed me it was just in case something happened. This was too close to comfort for me, so I texted his father to let him know what his son had done, causing the ex to be infuriated with me. However, I knew his father would not let that situation happen again. Since then, I've received lovelorn letters about how much I was still thought of, and that even when we are old and grey, he'll still love me. He attempted quite recently to make a friendship pact with my SO to have limited access to me, which he rationally declined. It's been a month since the ex last sent a message over social media that he was moving on and wished me the best. However, I intrinsically know this claim to be false and expect the day when he makes contact again. I don't think I'll ever be rid of him, honestly, unless he falls deeply in love with someone else to where the obsession falls on her. My conclusion of being in a love triangle for a short time was that I was confused, hurt, lonely, and looking for someone to rescue me. But I regret that it happened in a way where I could label it as a love triangle because it was unfair to both parties. I won't deny it's exciting to have two people dance with each other for your affections, but it isn't by any means healthy and at least one of the people will be hurt. After me basically being a butthole for a bit and stringing them both along while I tried to make up my mind, I stopped dating both of them and stayed single for about a year to get my crap together. I think generally if you're caught in a love triangle and don't know who to choose, that's a sign that neither of them is right for you. That is strangely down to earth for a person who was evidently involved in a situation that sounds like it was pretty unhealthy for a while. Good on you for changing, and I hope you keep it up. Married a gay guy. We were non-monogamous, I got really close to a friend with benefits, and now we're a 3. Took a hot mess and nearly 2 years of drama, but we are a functioning poly-triad. We definitely had our moments, but we're still here now, so we do live together and usually share a bed. They can both be complete punks about space and covers, and only one of us actually likes sleeping in the middle, so I occasionally take a break for a night or two. We're not actually non-monogamous, read open. Obviously, I do the deed with more than one person, 2 in fact, but that's just mostly been a crap ton of life stuff going on, including a big move, so that side of our lives has just been sort of on hold. Mine was like some kind of freak love square. 2 guys wanted to date me, and I wanted to date a guy who didn't give a crap about me unless it involved dancing. I gave up on chasing the dancer. I dated one of the guys who originally wanted to date me. It ended badly. I decided to date the other guy who seemed interested. We got married and are expecting a baby now. We were pretty good friends. She wasn't sure if she was into girls and wanted to experiment with someone she trusted. He and I had been dating on and off for 3 years, together for a full year at the time. We'd had a couple of 3-ways, and after a couple of drunken kisses between me and her, we suggested she join us. We worked well together for 6 months, dating each other equally. I was 3 years older than her, and people said we looked alike. Then she got a haircut and a dye job, and she suddenly looked like my little sister. It was not something I was into at all. But he was, and she was. And I pulled back a little, and then it was me versus her, and he chose her, and then dumped her because he wanted her little sister, her actual flesh and blood little sister. In conclusion, he chose her, she was the younger one, he left her because he was into her little sister. It made me less bitter. He asked her to marry him at my birthday dinner. She said yes, I got drunk, he drove me home. Our D&D group survived the event, and I was a bridesmaid. That's a crap move on his part. I'd been with my ex for 2 years, treated her like the princess that she wanted to be, gave her unconditional trust, which I have now learnt was a mistake. She had terrible social skills, so I encouraged her to make guy friends as she doesn't have any. Tried to get her back in contact with one of her long-lost friends from teenage years and encouraged them to spend time together, and I even spent time and got to know the guy to show my girl I have her interests in mind. She ends up doing the deed with him and telling me that they share a pure form of love, something she never had for me. Cried, been depressed, and felt like a worthless piece of crap because no matter what I did, it seems like I don't deserve to be loved. Forgave her, tried to win her back, and gave her patience and time while hiding how much this is killing me inside because she feels guilty to see me like this. End up figuring out she was just a spoilt, selfish brat because she will not stop lying to me and kept seeing him, and he is a manipulative and controlling substance addict, and they both never had a real relationship and told me that they developed true love within a couple of weeks of doing the deed with each other. It still hurts me like heck to think about this, but I really did everything that I could. It didn't end up good for me, fricked me up mentally as I have depression, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Older generations, who are the "I don't use computers" people of your time? My grandparents are very old-fashioned even for their generation, if it counts. My grandfather worked as a grocery manager for years. He finally quit when his small mum-and-pup store buckled down on bar scans and electronic cash registers. He was convinced that barcodes were going to be the mark of the beast from Revelations, and that if people use computers to access adult content, then all computerized items must be banned. So there's that. When remote control TVs came out, I suggested that my father buy one, and he said, "It will be a cold day in hell when I'm too lazy to tell one of you boys to get up and change the channel for me." It was such an amazing sentence that I committed it to memory, and I still remember it word for word 50 years later. From his point of view, he already had a remote control TV. Why should he pay extra to have it automated? Exactly. He would have had us act out Game of Thrones before getting a subscription to HBO. My mom was just telling me about when answering machines were new and how people were so fearful of them and refused to leave a message. She got promoted at a job because she didn't mind calling clients and leaving messages. I bought my grandmother an answering machine in 2005. She refused to get one before that, despite several of her children begging her to invest in one. I got her a $10 one from Walmart. I told her that I'd set it up for her, and she asked me where it was. She was under the impression that answering machines were about the size of a toaster oven. After some questions, I also learned that she objected to getting one for so long because she was concerned about how much counter space she thought it would take up. But she also used the same bathwater for a week at the time and kept her hearing aid batteries, all of them, not just the ones she wasn't currently using, in the freezer so they would last longer. So who knows? Some of the older alkaline batteries would slowly discharge over time. You could slow them down by storing the ones you weren't using in the freezer. It didn't make them last a lot longer, but it did give a slightly longer shelf life. However, my grandmother would keep all of her batteries in the freezer and not have any batteries in her hearing aids at all. As you can guess, that didn't improve her hearing, no matter how long the batteries were lasting in the freezer. I mean, I might be wrong. That sounds like it might stray from being technologically illiterate and just not caring that much about functioning in life in general. The battery freezer thing might be an incredible case of being a cheapskate. Some still had outdoor toilets and were laughing at those who'd installed them inside because they're crapping in their own houses? I lived on a homestead a little while. I had an outdoor pit privy toilet. I hand-carved the toilet seat myself. Sometimes I miss watching the sunset while taking a dump. It was way better than being stuck in a small room reading Reddit on my phone. Unless it was raining. Wiping while holding an umbrella is trickier than it looks. When I was a kid, late 50s and early 60s, seatbelts in the cars were an option. Lots of people thought they were unnecessary and refused to pay extra for them. Heaters and windshield defoggers were likewise optional. My parents bought a new 1964 Plymouth Valiant and didn't get the option. I think all it takes is one snowfall in the winter when you're struggling with a windshield that constantly fogs up and frosts over. Absolute misery pulling over and scraping the inside of your windshield. My dad once told me a story about his grandmother refusing to fly in planes because she didn't want to get her hair all messed up from the wind. I'm picturing her flying with Red Baron Snoopy as the pilot. Honey, I promise your hair won't get messed up from the wind. Plops leather bomber hat on her head. My 89-year-old mum pays for cable but insists on watching only PBS and occasionally NBC, CBS or ABC. The other channels are too much technology to find on the remote. She also buys multiple boxes or cans of food, dates them in Sharpie marker, records the price, less coupon or sale special, and has a rack for all her finds. She will never eat all the oatmeal or beans in our collective lifetimes. But she was a Depression-era child, so I get why the urge to stock up on food is strong. My grandmother is 89. When she was a kid, she had an uncle who hated cars. He called them machines and refused to drive one. It could have been job security though, her whole family worked for the railroad. In all fairness, cars are machines. Then again, so are trains. Fun fact, the Russian word for car is machina. My dad is 65. He remembers old folks complaining about the forward pass in football. But it did completely change the game. My grandaunt still believes that 15 is the age of adulthood, that schooling isn't necessary beyond that point. She grew up in a time when literacy wasn't a given. With a bachelor's degree and a very mediocre Spanish, I would have killed it in 1920. For all of about 8 years. Well, now I'm greatly depressed. My grandmother drinks only hot decaf coffee. Breakfast, hot decaf coffee. Dinner, hot decaf coffee. Feeling parched after a day of hard work? Hot decaf coffee. 100-degree July day with lung-clogging humidity? Hot decaf coffee. When I was growing up, we never had ice. That was a luxury. Cold drinks aren't good for your stomach. My parents are from former Soviet country and also refuse to drink anything cold, saying it'll make you sick. My dad doesn't even drink beer cold. Room temperature at most. Any beer-drinking alcoholic will tell you can drink a lot more beers if your beers are room temperature instead of cold. This is actually a very common thing in Asia. In China, they only drink hot water. According to Chinese medicine, cold water, and cold things in general, are very bad for your stomach. They won't eat refrigerated fruit. I lived in China for a few years, and my roommate thought I was insane for refrigerating my watermelon. I found that was the safest way to store it because none of them would touch it. In Germany, they don't put ice in their water. I've never liked ice in my water, so living in both Germany and China at different points in my life worked for me. The US is actually pretty unique in that everyone wants their beverages ice cold. I had a Chinese roommate in college who kept a gallon of Sunny D out at room temperature for weeks while drinking it. Weirded me out. My grandparents laughed at the idea of a mobile phone, or sending messages through the phone line when fax machines were a thing. My grandparents didn't like computers and they still had a typewriter or wrote by hand. I was given a typewriter as a kid, but then I was using Windows 95. OG hipster right there. I'll be honest, as a 30-something-year-old, I have no idea what a fax actually is. The gosh darn answer would be one Google search away, but I'm going to live on in ignorance for a few more minutes, so you lot can judge whether this is normal or whether I'm exceptionally ignorant. Back in the 80s, I knew an old lady who used one of those really old toasters that could only toast one side of the bread at a time. As a present, we went out and bought her a modern pop-up toaster, but she wouldn't use it. She preferred to use her old one. I could see if she had one of those rad Sunbeam Radiant toasters, which in many ways are superior to any toaster on the market today, but this is just a fire waiting to happen. I see you've also watched that Technology Connections video. I'm the web designer for a local organization. Their treasurer refuses to accept card payment via their website. People have to print out forms, fill them out, and post them with a check. I also get paid by check with a handwritten note. They would be a much more popular and successful business if they just modernized a little. My law firm still uses checks. We're also on QuickBooks Desktop 2008, and our timekeeping software is from 2011. We don't use Word, we use WordPerfect, and our forms are still set up to double space after periods. Nightmarish. My grandmother didn't like to use the remote control for her television because she was afraid it would break somehow and function as a laser dangerous enough to set things on fire. My grandmother complained about remote controls for TVs because it would promote people being lazy. Because apparently watching TV in the first place is a rigorous activity. Modern day. I've had people tell me using a voice-activated light system in my house is lazy because there's something to be said for getting up and turning on a light. Like what? It builds character to flip a switch? I'll take my space house, thanks. My Depression-era parents refused to ever have AC because it seemed frivolous and unnecessary, and my dad chose seatbelts as the symbol of government overreach and refused to ever wear one. In 1980, we took a family trip from Virginia to St. Louis and back with 4 kids in the bed of a pickup truck. I remember my grandma telling stories of when AC was a new feature in cars. People would keep their windows rolled up in summer so that people in other cars would think they had AC. My parents didn't have AC. I begged for it constantly, and every time my mum would send me outside for a few minutes instead. That way it would seem cooler inside by comparison. If it didn't, she'd tell me that I could go up into the attic and come back down. They bought an AC unit the year after I graduated and moved out. They just didn't want me to be comfortable, I guess. Being miserable builds character, or something. My senior year of high school, I had a series of newspaper articles in the local paper explaining how the web wasn't a fad and wasn't going away. Nobody but one guy at the paper believed it. It was 1995. My high school, I graduated in 2000, was like this. We didn't have computers in high school, and although there was pressure to buy them, the administration claimed computers were a dying fad, and spent the money that was to go for a computer lab on new football equipment instead. This was rural Pennsylvania, and I assure you, I'm not making this up. Others did bring up a good point and stated this is a tactic for administration to spend how they want versus what the school needs. Also, according to people who still live there whose kids now go to school there, the school did a 180 on technology in the early 2000s, and kids now have computer classes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a professor in college that taught building systems. He was like 80 years old, knew all of the new ways to build a structure. Never used CAD. All of his details and plans were hand-drawn. I've taught a couple of classes on how to use more advanced functions in CAD. None of my students had ever even seen a French curve before. I was purposely taught how to hand-draft in high school, 2007, before I learned CAD. My grandfather used to yell about, "You lazy kids and your zippers!" My father worked at a car dealership up until 2018, was a manager and had a computer on his desk. Someone filed a claim that he had harassed them, saying he sent lewd emails. IT came to his desk and logged onto his computer. Not only had he never sent an email, he had never read one either. He had more than 60,000 unread emails. His boss asked him how he knew about meetings if he never checked his email. It's not hard. You see everyone get up and walking to a location, you follow. Needless to say, he was cleared and the person making false claims was fired. Color TV. When they became common in the mid-60s, a lot of older people believed they emitted harmful rays. When Mum finally got one in circa 1972, it was kept in her bedroom and we were ushered in to watch it only on special occasions, and we had to sit at least 10 feet away. Given how small and low resolution even a big TV was in 1972, I can't help but laugh at the crowded family squinting to work out what was happening from across the room. My grandmother is 97 and told me about people who would refuse to get air conditioning or drink sodas because they're the devil's work. She grew up on a farm in a 2-room house with 11 family members living in that house. She always had sodas and the AC rocking and rolling all summer. My grandma is 79 and refuses to turn on her AC for religious and "it's gonna make mold grow everywhere" reasons. I swear she's gonna die of heat stroke one summer, but welp, she's into some kind of hardcore sub-Christian or Catholic cult. It's not Amish, Mormon, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, too minor so I forgot the name. Tech is not forbidden per se in their thing, but it's not liked at all by their thing. It's like everything bad that's happening to Canada comes from soulless new tech and immigrants. The whole thing is weird and doesn't make sense to atheist software engineering students like me, so I'd have trouble explaining more. My mother refuses to get a smartphone. She does, however, have a tablet with a data plan she takes with her everywhere, in addition to her dumb phone. When I point out that tablets are just big smartphones, she scoffs. What can you do? I don't read novels. My grandfather thought they were a plot by the elites to both ruin our eyesight and keep us locked away in a fantasy world. How old are you that the technological advancement your grandfather didn't trust was books? Socrates has joined the chat. Scrolls were good enough for my parents and their parents before them. Socrates didn't even really like scrolls either. Since your writings don't update as you learn more or change your mind, he thought that they would just spread misinformation and it was better to rely on talking. Love you, Socrates, but writing is the invention that allows for a large society to function. What Socrates needed was GitHub, to be honest. I said at one time I would never buy CDs. I liked albums and tapes too much. I never got rid of the albums and tapes, but now I have many CDs also. When they first became available, I honestly felt that both CDs and DVDs were just an industry conspiracy to stop people from recording their own music or movies with cassettes or VHS. DVDs were originally marketed as uncrackable or uncopyable, so you're not entirely wrong. I remember it being a huge deal when that guy found out how to do it and shared that info to the world. My grandpa used to tell me that he was basically set for life because he learned to read and write. Mass illiteracy wasn't as long ago as we like to think. Touch-tone dialing. My mum refused to pay the $1 and change a month to have it. She finally caved in around 2002. Since several have asked, touch-tone was a keypad, much like what almost every phone is now. Before that, it was a rotary dial phone. When my dad was in his 80s and losing some of his marbles, I started taking over some of his household chores and errands. Discovered that he was still using a rotary phone because he wasn't paying for touch-tone. He was, however, still paying a rental fee for his telephone. He had been renting it for 50 years. We went to the phone store and got him a touch-tone and they waived the fee, so that his bill pretty much remained the same with the new phone. I also got him a cordless, but he hated using it. He'd forget how to answer it. Press talk. Poke? It was sad to watch a formerly bright person, former high school teacher, totally unable to cope with simple household items. I still miss him. Digital clocks are lazy. My school has to hold an assembly for the 5th graders every year who can't read analog clocks because they can't afford to replace all the clocks in the middle and high school buildings. As silly as this is, I think that analog clocks will always be around. As a nearsighted person, I can often read an analog when my eyes can't see a digital one. Grandfather thought graduating high school was a big deal. He graduated in 1941 and was the first in his family. We had a great aunt who hated using the washing machine and claimed it never cleaned the sheets properly. At least in Costa Rica, where I live, at that time it was all you needed. Once you ended high school, you were pretty much set up for life. Some of my grunkles married shortly after finishing it and are still happily married. Boy, that's a different time. To think it was normal for people about my age to have been married and stable for half their lives, when a lot of my counterparts right now don't own houses, is just kind of wild. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural North Carolina in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story when riding on a bus back from work one day, and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blake Burners got one of them fancy TVs, saying how it was an evil thing and would simply be bad of one of them to buy one, and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough to never get one. Of course, they knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that Grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough that they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on those neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which back then was an hour drive from anywhere else. An acquaintance of mine told me her grandmother doesn't own a refrigerator because refrigerators are harmful and for lazy people that don't want to cook fresh food. I remember people's parents not having microwaves, although by the time I was growing up that was pretty rare. The convenience had won over almost everyone by then. I've had a coworker about 52 years old, refused to use a computer because he caught his wife having an affair on a chat room on their computer, so he destroyed it. At that point, if she wants to cheat, she'll find another way. Yeah, she was cheating. The computer is how he found out, right? I still have a wall phone in my kitchen. A young woman at my workplace asked me in all innocence if I sell my house, will the new owners be forced to have a landline too? My grandfather refused to get a VCR, but not because he was a Luddite. VCRs were all made in Japan, and he'd fought in the Pacific in World War II, so he refused to buy anything Japanese. Interesting side fact, this is why Nissan originally started selling cars as Datsun. They figured there was going to be a lot of bitter vets who remembered Nissan making war materials. Did Volkswagen ever have the same problem? They did for a bit. The brand got passed around a bunch before they started production. It was even going to be given to Ford for free, and they declined. It was offered to a bunch of different English companies. They all declined. So it was given back to Germany under supervision. It might have helped that they didn't actually make that many before all the factories started churning out war stuff. Seriously, the very first assembly plant opened in 38 and the war started in 39. Not a ton of time spent making bugs. They only made 210 before shutting down. Civilian bugs only started happening in the late 40s and only boomed in popularity in the mid-60s-ish. 20 years after the war ended, and during an entirely different war, so I imagine for some, it was easy to ignore the German aspect. Rural areas are always fun for this. In a grocery store, I overheard an older couple, back in 1989, discussing their high cholesterol levels. They didn't trust doctors and said downing a cup of really hot coffee every morning would clear the obstructions. No need for fancy medicine. I'm 65. Back in the early 1980s, I remember my grandmother asking my dad if they still made cars with the levers, throttle and spark advance, up by the steering wheel. The last car she had driven was a Model T Ford in about 1930. My grandma refused to get a TV in the early 1950s. My dad always wanted to watch shows, but he had to sneak to his friend's house because she didn't believe in getting a TV. My grandfather was a Mennonite, but had moved to a city and was working in factories as an adult. He even used to watch TV until John Wayne died, then he got rid of their set. He said it was evil to watch dead people moving around on a screen as if alive, like watching ghosts. He would tell us that TV was the devil's work. As a kid, I started drawing cartoon characters like animal characters and stuff. One day, he asked to see my drawings and he was outraged, saying I was drawing the product of bestiality, said it was evil. All that said, I loved him, and as I got older, he and I got really close. He was a God-fearing man, but he was also a very humble, peaceful, and funny guy. He taught me woodworking, gardening, and the joy of just sitting quietly in nature. He was just trying to save you from becoming a furry. My grandpa had to fight a hard campaign to get his dad and grandpa to switch from farming with horses to farming with tractors. His grandpa continued to maintain the horses for his own garden until his death in the 1960s. Store workers and customers, what's your people of Walmart story? I worked at a Walmart for about 2 months. The weirdest thing I saw was an obese lady on a scooter run over a fat kid in the candy aisle and then threaten him because he almost tipped her. Security was called and she demanded to receive her items for free. Eventually, we just let her take the stuff because it was only like $5 worth of Skittles. What she really needed was tip assist. And some really good old-fashioned sketty wrestling. This is why some crap people continue to be crap people. You mother frickers gave them free Skittles when they caused a gosh darn scene. Just like my spineless corporate slave of a manager when I worked retail. I worked at Walmart last year as a cashier, and a woman came up to my register with nothing but a pineapple and a damaged one at that. It was 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, so it was a slow night, and she demanded I give her this pineapple for 25 cents because it was damaged. I didn't see any damage, so I asked her to show me the damage. She promptly ripped the top greens off the pineapple and said, "See it now?" I called my manager over and he said he can't sell it to her for a discount and he's sorry but she can get another one. She cursed, threw the pineapple at me, and walked out mumbling about needing a cigarette. She was a prime example of trailer trash, but damn she threw that pineapple hard. Fun fact, if you can pluck out the greens easily, it's a ripe pineapple. Usually the best metric I find is to smell it and see if it actually smells like pineapple. A lot of yellow is also a good indicator. You're correct, the most yellow while not having mold on the bottom is the best metric. Properly ripened pineapples are completely yellow, but they're never picked that way commercially and do not ripen off the plant, because they don't ship well when ripened. Here I am talking about a nightmare from my old job and suddenly I know how to pick out the perfect pineapple. So last year I worked at a Walmart supercenter as a cart pusher. You tend to see a lot of strange stuff in the parking lot, so all the weird crap doesn't even get your attention after a while. Part of the cart pusher's job is to bring back the store scooters after people leave them in the parking lot. One day I see an old woman outside the store just sitting on a scooter. This lady must have sat there for a good 2 hours before finally getting up to reveal a gigantic brown stain all over the lower back of her hoodie, running up and down her pants. This obese lady who saw the whole thing comes sprinting up to the scooter and sits down on it before I could even clean it. She looked at me and said, "I don't care, hun. It was the last one left and my legs is killing me." When someone is so large that they'd rather sit in a person's waist than walk, you know that they have a serious freaking problem. I feel like there's going to be an awful lot of humanity in this group of stories. Maybe I should attempt to resist the urge to make judgmental comments for once. My privileged and ailment-free butt doesn't get to cast stones at people who have trouble walking and controlling their bowels. This was back in the late 90s. I was working at Walmart as my first job as a teenager. I was floated to the garden department one day and there was a guy looking at lawn fertilizer. I walked over and asked if he needs help. He said, "Not now, just looking at the different kinds you have." Pretty standard reply from the guy, so I said, "Okay, let me know." I walked away and then swang back in about 5 minutes. The same guy has proceeded to rip open about 10 different kinds of fertilizer all over the ground and is rolling around in the stuff. He's also taste sampling the stuff. I call my manager because I don't want to deal with it. Security escorted the guy out of the store and called an ambulance in case the ingestion of the fertilizer hurt him. I was expecting the story to end with, "And the guy tried to buy all we had and then the feds showed up." Instead, crap osmosis. Saw an old man take a dump on the floor of the bread aisle once. I worked at Whole Foods and on shift a person in dairy dropped a load right in the middle of the aisle. They must have been extremely lactose intolerant. "What is that? Milk? Oh no!" Mother's Day 2013. I was CSMing and handling the day as best as could be expected on a Sunday holiday where the employees were mostly female mothers. We had 13 call-outs and 5 no-call, no-shows. I had 5 poor women to handle the whole Sunday. Lines were long, I knew it. I didn't have anyone in the store coming in to help, management couldn't spare anyone. They understaffed on purpose. So I hear a call over the radio that someone has busted an aerosol can and they needed one of the maintenance associates on shift to deal with it. Apparently some jerk teenagers thought it would be funny to pop about 5 air freshener spray cans and let them spin and spit eye-stinging chemicals. I'm getting yelled at by a blue-haired old woman about the lines when I get the call that made me regret waking up that day and coming to work. "Sharon, you see that kid in the orange shoes to your left? Stop him." "Okay, why?" "He messed himself and is tracking feces all over. I'm trying to find his mother on the cameras right now." "Oh great, now I have a feces-covered 5-year-old to look after on top of everything. Did you find the mum yet?" "Yep, she was in the parking lot doing smack. Cops came, I had to mop up the feces, mum went to jail for possession with intent, neglect, and other felonious activities. The kid got cleaned up, I bought him new underwear and pants and socks, and I hosed off his shoes. He went with a social worker. I wanted to quit after that day. Someday that kid will post on future Reddit about an awful time he had as a child, and the only highlight is the kind Walmart employees that got him clean underwear, pants, and socks. He won't remember who it was, but he'll wish that he could thank you for your kindness." Thank you for your kind words. I only did what any compassionate human being would have done. It's amazing how many people bring their non-service animals into the store. I don't have a problem with dogs and such, But when I see the small dog you're carrying scratch and dander falls into the vegetables you're looking over, we've got a problem. Once a woman brought a bird into a fast casual dining establishment at which I was employed at that time. I told her she could order and pay, but she needed to wait outside because animals weren't allowed. She pointed to a service dog and demands to know why that dog can be in the store and not her bird. I informed her that this dog was a registered service and support animal that had been certified in its role and is probably vital to its owner's daily life. She starts screaming, and I mean screaming, "He's a healing bird! I love him! He helps me!" Now birds, you may know, don't really appreciate loud noises accompanied by sudden movements of the arms. She's also flailing her arms, and it takes off flying around the store. Chaos ensues. People are mad, and I no longer have to try to handle this lady because her friend has caught the bird and is literally dragging her out. The dog was fine though. My town has a bird guy, an older gentleman whose budgie rides around on the bill of his hat. He takes the thing everywhere. Nobody seems to mind because it always appears to be totally under control. I once saw him in Walmart with a little perch in the shopping cart for his bird to ride on. Not a worker, but standing in line one night, a lady seemed to be having a hard time being a parent to her 3-year-old daughter. At one point, the kid asks if she can have a candy bar that was next to the register. The exchange went like this. "Mommy, can I have a Snickers?" "I don't give a damn." Kid tries to reach up for candy. "I can't reach it. Can you help me?" "You want me to help you get the candy? You need to get a fricking job." Sounds about as classy as my cousin. She was potty training her 4-year-old and the little girl says, "Mommy, I have to poop." Only for my crap heap of a cousin to yell, "I put you in a fricking diaper. Use it." Well, I thought this would mostly be a mildly amusing series of cutaways, like from the excellent TV show Superstore. Little did I know how sad it would get. I worked at Walmart in the toy department 10 years ago, right out of high school for extra money. The amount of parents who would drop their children off in the toy department like I was a babysitter was out of this world. By the time they'd left it, it would be a disaster area. On more than one occasion, I'd see them running down the aisle with their arms outstretched, just knocking crap on the floor. When the parents would come back, there was no, "Hey, let's pick all this up." They'd just leave. I only lasted a few months. I actually quit a week before Black Friday because we had an instance at our morning meeting where some of the veteran employees were telling us what to expect on Black Friday from customers. Examples include being spat on, pulled by the arms, knocked over, shoved, tripped, screamed at, hair pulled, threatened, etc. I went on break and didn't come back. Not worth minimum wage. That sucks. I can sympathize. I lifeguarded at a public school for several years in high school, and people did this all the time. More often than not, the kids under the age of 10. I yanked them out of the deep end, and they didn't have any parents or guardians with them. Unbelievably frustrating in both scenarios. You're the person who brought this child into the world, which means you're responsible for him or her. The worst part is that these people are the ones to raise lawsuits if their kid gets hurt while under your watch. I spent many of my summers at the local pool, but in my case, I was old enough to bring myself there, and it wasn't my parents just dropping me off. And older than their posted 13 and under must be with an adult sign. That pool actually did pull unattended children out when they noticed them, and get the police involved in returning them to their parents. Since nobody involved ended up amused by this, it didn't usually happen repeatedly. The one that sticks out in my mind is this couple of really overweight folks. That in itself is not such an issue, but it's the smell I remember. It hit me before I saw them, the very distinct smell of festering, unwashed body. And naturally, they came straight to me to ask for things. Ugh, I have a few of those where I work, and the two of them have no sense of personal space. I've taken to holding a large item in front of me as a spacer whenever I see them come in. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, I have so many people. But actually, why don't I introduce you to another worker? Meet Gary. Gary is 81 years old. He also fought in the Vietnam War. Gary is a short little cute old man. However, Gary is also fricking crazy. Let's go through everything Gary told me before I left for school. The Kennedys committed the atrocities of September 11th. Yup, the entire gang was in on it. JFK, RFK, Ted, Ed, and John. Why else do you think JFK and RFK were assassinated? Agent Orange is for wimps. Obama gave 2 statements after Charleston, one to the country and another to his cabinet that said they were going to take all the guns. That school shooting was fake, because Joe Biden actually adopted all the fake victims so he would never see them again. He owned a bunch of real estate in California and owned adult video stores. He actively went to adult flick conventions and said that he was in the committee to determine if someone could be a adult flick superstar, so that meant he got to do the deed with a bunch of girls. Blacks by law can't be police officers. If you want to woo, yes, he said it like Ric Flair, a female, you just gotta ask me for some tips. Alright, thanks Gary, I have a girlfriend though. My girlfriend's got a tight hoo-ha. Okay, Gary wasn't just delusional, Gary also didn't have a filter. Woman with a large chest walks past him. Did you see the bosom on her? And she heard him. John, if you don't go on break, I'm going to tie your braces to the back of my car and tear them off. I did the deed with my girlfriend last night. Oh, okay. I was pounding it from behind. Gary, aren't you like 80? Oh, don't worry, I took a pill before I did it. Gary wasn't just delusional and obnoxious, he was defiant. From day one to my last day, he had a theory that the boss was out to get him, and that the boss always got upset over petty things. He used to say, "Frick that wang-sucker Dave." But our boss didn't get upset over petty things, and his name was actually Bill. I miss Gary's crazy butt. Gary sounds awesome in small doses. When I worked in another department, I loved Gary because he was like that old man who sits on a porch. He would wave every time he passed because he was insistent that there needed to be someone at the cash register 24/7. There didn't need to be. When we started working together in the same department, we became enemies. I was being groomed to take over the department when the department manager was going to retire later that year. I'd started in April and they made the announcement in June. Gary had been there since 2011. I was 18 and he was 81. He didn't like it in the slightest. So we started butting heads constantly and he would threaten me with ridiculous things like tying my braces to his car. So then I responded right back. I got a wireless speaker, put it in the cash register place and played high-pitched noises until he yelled, "What the frick is going on?" And he would make ridiculous claims like that I'd set up a wire trap with a shotgun so when I came in today I would get shot, but luckily I saw the wire. I own a business in front of a supercenter. This morning I came in and noticed my dumpster was stuffed full with Walmart's garbage. I reviewed my HD camera and saw their contracted parking lot sweepers throwing over 20 bags of garbage away at 5:15 in the morning. I got in that gosh darn dumpster, pulled all those bags out and filled 6 Walmart carts up. I rolled them right on in front of the store and then I went back to my office, called the manager and told him that the next time I would call the cops for illegal dumping. Being in front of a Walmart sucks sometimes. There's a huge dumped cat colony and the place is a bum magnet. Thanks for reading, I just had to get that off my chest. Ah, that sucks. I think I would have called the manager first and had them send someone to get their garbage out of your dumpster. No point in you getting filthy because of their stuff up. Oh, I imagine there was a fair bit of catharsis in cleaning that stuff out and airing out all of their literal garbage in front of the store. Maybe not the most adult reaction, but I get it. So a couple of years ago, I was in between jobs, I needed loot to pay the bills, so I figured that I'd take a job at Walmart until something better came along. I ended up working in the lawn and garden section, which is actually fun when you get to play with the plants all day long. However, I wasn't aware that lawn and garden also does all of the holiday setup and placing said product on the floor. Fast forward a week before the public school systems were in session, I had a cart full of notebook paper, pencils, trapper keepers, etc. that I was trying to put on the shelves when a sound ripped through my eardrums that was similar to the ones that are typically only heard on the Discovery Channel. Several decibels too loud, the best I can describe it is cats being lit on fire by their tails and being chased by rabid wolves. I looked around to figure out who in the crap was being murdered in the store when I saw him. It was a kid about 8 years old who looked as if he was desperately trying to become Jabba the Hutt, and said kid was succeeding. Now, I have no problem with fat kids. I typically even think that they're pretty freaking cute. However, this kid was not, due mainly to the alligator tears that were rolling down his cheeks, the beach red color on his face, and the sounds coming out from his throat hole. It took me a minute to figure out what in the heck was going on in my aisle until I realized that this kid was throwing a fit because his parents wouldn't buy him 3 different trapper keepers. One of which was Hello Kitty. Normally I'd just shrug and say, typical Saturday in Walmart, but oh no. This little B-word realized that his dad wasn't paying attention to him and was instead focused on the others kids that I'm only assuming share some form of genetic makeup with this whiny beast of burden. This tees off the kid even more since he howls with rage and, here's where it gets insane, kicks his what looked like 8-month pregnant mother in the stomach. To her credit, this lady didn't whomp the spoiled little monster's butt right in the aisle. No, she instead collapsed on the darn floor and had to be taken away by paramedics, and that little B-word took that as a sign that he could have all the trapper keepers he wanted. I watched this whole thing go down, and as the dad watched his wife get loaded into the ambulance, not one iota of, "you're gonna get it later," came from him. Instead, the crap stain that kicked his mum started crying about being hungry and wanting chicken nuggets, which the dad then took him to get. This is why I hate people. I stopped shopping at Walmart when I went to college. The local Walmart was notoriously bad. 3 times in a row I went there and walked down an aisle just in time to see a kid peeing themselves in the aisle and no parent was in sight. The city made big news when the Walmart men's restroom was found to have a makeshift crystal lab in one of the stalls. Our area was predicted for a moderate snowstorm, but the weather forecasts gave it ridiculous numbers, like they claimed we'd have 6 inches of ice and 2 feet of snow in one night. Us rational people knew, and were right, that we'd probably get 4 inches of snow. But many people swarmed the Walmart, and a few people made a Facebook page showing how devastated the store was in preparation for Snowpocalypse 2011. The Facebook page showed pictures as the store was swept clean within a couple of hours of ramen, wine, milk, and cheese. My favorite picture that someone put up was the 40-year-old man who had a shopping cart with 37 gallons of milk in it. Nothing else, just a crap ton of milk. That man sounds like the guy from your elementary school math problems. Okay, so I was leaving Walmart with my purchases. As I walked down to my car in the parking lot, I saw a pair of adult sweatpants sitting in a sort of pile they do when someone steps out of them, with a massive, messy crap on top of them. I had so many questions. Where did the person go after detonating these pants? Into the store? Just bottomless into their car with crappy butt cheeks? Amazing. I don't work at Walmart, but when I was halfway across the country visiting some friends, the Walmart in their town had a crystal lab bust in the men's restroom. Oh, good old Muncie, Indiana. I used to attend college in that town. I just graduated high school and took a job at Wally World since they always paid above minimum wage up here. On the most part, Canadian Walmart is completely different from the what-the-frick mecca that is the American one. I guess the main thing that stuck was during the summer. I was working as a truck unloader in the back and had to bring out a skid of diapers and such to the infant section. As I approached, I noticed a smell. At first I thought it was that gosh darn bird that always flew around. I figure I hadn't seen it in days, so maybe it had died somewhere around there and was stinking up the place. I dropped the skid off and went past the women's changing rooms. That's where all the girls who worked in clothing hung out. I was hoping to say hi to everyone, but I noticed that they delta split from that location. Reason they moved? It was the epicenter of the smell. To this day, I have never smelled anything quite like it. I've worked in a microbiology lab growing mold and fungi. I've worked in hospitals and smelled all sorts of nasty. I put in some time in pathology labs. Needless to say, I've smelled a whole bunch of horrible things in my life, but nothing compares to that Walmart scent. What was it, you ask? Well, it turns out that an elderly lady had gone into the changing room and taken a giant Coke can-width grey-coloured crap with flecks of black in it, and a bit of blood coating some of it, all over the floor. The whole thing must have weighed 2 pounds easy. She wrote a little letter and left it in the room with the clothes she was trying on. All the letter said was, "I am so sorry." Needless to say, I think Granny had something horribly wrong with her, because crap doesn't smell like that. To this day, I assumed the black in the crap was dried blood from some internal issue, and I figured she tore her butthole pushing that monster out. The smell though, it's like if you huff an abscess while smearing yourself with durian fruit while taking a dump. It was easily the worst smelling thing I've ever experienced. In conclusion, some grandma took a horribly thick crap on the floor which had blood in it. I feel like at least once a week I have to do one story that makes me gag, and ladies and gentlemen, that was it. Congratulations everyone, I'll see you on the next one. Just last week I was unloading a truck in the back and this morbidly obese woman hobbles up through the big associates-only doors, bends over, and drops a load on the floor, pulls her pants back up and walks out. I got written up for yelling, "What the actual frick?" but after the managers looked at the camera, they thought it was justified for me to yell that and let me off with a warning. I don't know what happened to her, but the maintenance guys were teed off. I feel like Walmart is one of the few things where all of the stereotypes and stories you hear are actually super accurate. My experience though, a very overweight woman with a walker strapped to the back of her electric wheelchair was drinking half and half straight from a carton while she threw loose pairs of sandals all over the floor. I have a friend who hasn't been to a Walmart in 15 years. He flat out refuses to go in for any reason. He's a pretty down-to-earth guy, not the type who thinks he's better than anyone else, but he avoids Walmart specifically because of the people who shop there. His reasons usually center around crying babies, overweight aisle cloggers, and the few weird old men who sit by the entrance or exit gawking at the college girls. One day, my friend and I were looking for a certain product before leaving town on a trip. We had just been to a few stores around town and I kept telling him, I know that this is in Walmart, we should just go there. Finally, he agrees to go visiting Big Box Land, but he will go into the Home Depot next door to look for a product while I go into Walmart. As soon as I step inside the door, I see a massive woman on a motorized shopping cart with her massive 12-year-old son standing on the back of it. She's screaming at him, saying, "Now you get off of there, boy," or something like that. His retort, "Frick you, mama, you ain't even handicapped." I got the product we need that day, but now I do my best to avoid Walmart as well. I saw this lady start screaming about a golden lab service dog being too close to her child. The child was sitting in a cart in the checkout line and the dog was calmly sitting on the floor behind her. The dog doesn't even bark, lick, or move, nothing. And the woman gets ghetto and starts shouting at everyone in sight. She had to be escorted from the store and never got to buy her stuff. At least Walmart protected the real victim in this situation. People who don't believe that this stuff actually happens must have never worked in retail. I can assure you that this is an everyday occurrence around Atlanta. What was your most shocking discovery in an ancestry test? My biological dad left his family and 2 daughters in Washington and married my mum in LA 5 weeks later. I found his first marriage certificate, but nothing about a divorce. I'm pretty sure he was a bigamist. My father-in-law was married to at least 2 women at a time. Nice guy, but a man whore. And I think he just didn't want to let each woman down when she got pregnant and/or started bringing up marriage. My mother-in-law says that he was already married when they got married, but we also know that he has a child 3 months younger than my husband, and the woman and child both go by the father-in-law's last name. And that's not the woman mother-in-law claims he was married to when he married her. So he might possibly have had 3 wives at the same time. My husband has upwards of 10 half-siblings from his dad. Who has the time? Bigamy seems exhausting. Someone very close to me discovered that none of the ethnic background that they were expecting was present in the results. This person, whose father was deceased at the time, questioned their mother. The mother admitted that the person's father was not biological as they had believed their entire life. They were older than 40, by the way. The mother gave the name of the biological father. My friend then found the biological father, contacted him, and then discovered that they had several half-siblings. The biological father was unaware that he had another child and accepted my friend into his family, as did the siblings. I found out my dad is not my biological father. Turns out the family friend I grew up calling Grandpa is. Oh yeah, and he was also my mum's bariatric surgeon. That felt weird, man. Dang, he was supposed to make her belly smaller, and he made it bigger instead. I have an uncle that was put up for adoption. He contacted my grandma and she thought he was going to extort her. They're well off. Turns out he's a multi-millionaire on his own. They still have limited contact, though my dad has reached out and formed a relationship. Apparently they look exactly alike and have the same personality, which sounds kind of stupid now that I'm writing it out, but they're only half-siblings. Me and my half-brother look pretty much the same, and have very similar personalities despite having different dads. It's even funnier because I'm female, so does he look like a girl or do I look like a boy? Oh god. Best not to go down that wormhole. Why don't you just say that your beauty has a genderless quality like Tilda Swinton or David Bowie? Those two could basically be long-lost siblings anyway, and then you can move on. I was adopted and always knew I was adopted. My parents told me that I came from a family that had already had all of their kids. They lived several towns over. I was a surprise to them. 3 years ago, my wife decided to take some DNA tests. I figured, what the heck, maybe I'm a part Zulu warrior. That'd be cool. When the tests came back, I found out I had a first cousin. They had listed a public email. I emailed them, started comparing notes, and wham! I was in for quite a surprise. First, I was not born into a traditional family. Instead, my biological mum was single. Second, I was not a late addition. I had 4 sisters and 1 brother. I was the baby, but only by a couple of years. Third, mostly all of them lived nearby. Finally, nobody knew I was alive. My biological mum had passed. She had kept the pregnancy secret from everybody else. Before she died, she had confided in one of my biological sisters that she'd had a baby a long time ago, and she'd put the baby up for adoption. She'd told nobody else. When my sister told the rest of the family, they didn't believe her. So when I finally looked them up, she was like, "See? All those years, I told you so. We have a baby brother." It was an amazing experience. I had no idea what I was getting into when I sent that DNA test off. So I'm in a similar boat. I was given up for adoption by my biological mom, and none of her family knew about me. However, I was not her first or last child. I was her second of 4 kids. My older half-brother, we all have different dads, I don't know who mine is, and I don't think my bio-mom does either, was adopted by my mom's parents. Her whole family found out about me when I found her when I was 19 and went to visit. It was pretty weird. I feel like the lucky one who got out. I don't talk to my bio-mom. She's not a good parent to my 2 younger brothers, and I hate that she pretends to know me or be my parent. My wife is adopted but found her bio-mom and did one of the genetic tests. Someone matched with her and asked if she knew such and such a name. She found out her bio-mom's husband wasn't the bio-dad, and it was the bio-mom's boss. Whoops. Not gonna lie, I'm adopted and I'm the daughter of an affair some unnamed man had with a waitress in her early 20s. I have no desire to take those DNA tests. Your wife is brave. My aunt discovered that her mother cheated on her father and she was the product of that affair, meaning she was only actually half-siblings with her 4 siblings. The rub was that my aunt's husband was married before he married her. The woman he was married to is the daughter of the man involved in the affair. So no one knew this, but my uncle got divorced and then married his ex-wife's half-sister. I guess he has a type. Wow, did it cause any problems with the family, finding out the other mother cheated? They only found out recently, long after the parents had died. I think my aunt is very ashamed to learn of it, but not any problems. My aunt knew her husband's ex from growing up and never liked her. I don't think she has any intention of having a relationship with her. A woman over in Chicago decided to find out who her real parents were. She was getting close to 60 and realized that there may not be much time left to find her father. So through the magic of ancestry, she was matched to my grandfather. She reached out to him and told him who her mother was. He didn't recognize the name but dug up his little black book and lo and behold, there she was. So now I've got a new aunt. My male cousin did one and found a female cousin that we didn't know about. He reached out to her and apparently our deceased uncle was good friends with her mother. Mum wanted a baby, so uncle got her pregnant simply as a sperm donor. Female cousin lived a few blocks away from my grandmother. She had met her a few times going around selling Girl Scout cookies or something. My grandmother had no idea that she was buying cookies from her granddaughter. That's crazy. I can't believe days go by and you wouldn't even know about your own granddaughter. Was it a coincidence that they lived so near to each other? I imagine since they live so close, they've gotten closer because of this as well. My grandmother never knew. She was very old-fashioned and would not have been pleased with the thought of her son having a child with someone he wasn't married to. We didn't know the cousin existed until after my grandmother passed away. I was approached by a married lesbian couple to be such a donor, but I was never able to bring myself to do it. I don't like the idea of having a kid that's technically mine running around and having nothing to do with him or her. I also found out from Googling that there really is no legal provision for such a situation, so you can get forced into child support at pretty much any time. Found out I have a different father. My dad also took a DNA test at the same time and found out his father, of 52 years, was not his biological father either. As it turns out, I come from a line of bastards. Where beer does flow and men chunder. You should just watch out if your wife ever gets pregnant, though. I found a half-sister that none of my siblings or mother knew about. My dad had an affair 50 years ago. He's dead now. For us, it wasn't really a surprise. We already knew we have a half-sister from another affair, but for the newly discovered one, it answered a lot of questions and gave her some needed closure. We all met a few times. It was pleasant. I like to think that there'll be lots of silver linings in these discoveries. So far, we haven't found out that anyone came from a family of war criminals or slaveholders, but I'm sure we'll find one by the end of the video. A friend who never knew who his father was, Mum had a weekend fling in college and never contacted the guy after, had his wife help him to use Ancestry.com to try and track him down. My friend reached out and the guy was obviously surprised but flew across the country to meet him. They have a great relationship now, the dad attended his wedding, and they try to get their families together a couple of times a year or so. That's awesome. I was hoping DNA testing would find my husband's dad, but no such luck. Never found anyone on his possible dad's side closer than about a third cousin, so no luck even finding anyone who knows who he might be. My real father and my 3 half-siblings. It ended up being a really good discovery. Had a great uncle who learned that he had a son from his teenage years that he never knew about. Luckily, he was able to meet him before he passed away. Same here. At the age of 60, I discovered who my real father was and that I have 9 half-siblings. He was a bit of a dog. A friend discovered that her father was not really her father. Her mum had had an affair, and she was the result. It tore her family apart. Her father did not know he was not really her father. Note that she was 45 years old when this happened. I can understand the fallout with the mum and wife over the affair and secret, etc., but did her father basically end up treating your friend any differently after that? Yes, he basically stopped talking to her. She was very hurt by that. I don't know that he's ever started talking to her again. He was always a bit distant, but he just stopped their relationship. Yeah, no way. My daughter is 4, and if I found out she wasn't mine, I would be very upset and may have issues with my wife, but my girl would always be my girl. My son is my 4th cousin. We adopted him as an infant from an agency. Fun to find that we are actually related. What an innocent way to loop a branch back around in a family tree. Not me, but a family friend. He did the test and found out that he had a half-brother. Turns out his dad had an affair a while back, and that kid was a product of that affair. A full 100% older brother. My mother got pregnant by my father before they were married. Scandalous in 1960. So, with my father's knowledge of the situation, Mum left town and lived with my aunt until the birth. Mum gave the baby up for adoption and then returned home. A couple of years later, she married my dad and had 3 more children together, including me. 55 years later, after both my parents had died, my aunts let it slip that me and my siblings were not the only children of our parents. To paraphrase from Star Wars, there is another. My sister took a DNA test, and a couple of years later she got a hit. Soon thereafter, we met our new big brother and his family, wife and kids, and we've all become quite close. This is the exact same story as my mother. She was the one given away and met her 3 sisters for the first time when she was about 50. So if your parents were to explain what happened to them and how they gave the baby up, when do you think you'd want to have heard the news? Like when you were little kids? Teens? Early 20s adults? This is a sincere question, but feel free not to answer. I would have preferred hearing it from them after I became an adult. From Mum, at least. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My cousin took a test and goes on and on about how she's almost completely Irish. Our grandpa was German. I've heard from my mum as a kid that my aunt's biological father was probably her friend's father. I've looked the family up on Facebook and my aunt looks just like that friend. My cousin seems to have no idea of any of this. I don't think my aunt does either. Similar in my family, German grandpa has a child and grandchildren with no German blood. He's passed a few years ago, but the evidence is there. My ex-husband's family were proud of their Dutch heritage and claimed to be one of the founding families of the historically Dutch Holland, Michigan. His ancestry results didn't show any Dutch ancestry, instead he had primarily English and Irish ancestry. Oh my gosh, I grew up in West Michigan. The amount of people who say, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, without having an ounce of Dutch in them is hilarious. The Netherlands today has the reputation of being a fun-loving, party-happy, hippie country because of 100 years ago all of my ancestors leaving and everyone who stayed behind hasn't stopped celebrating. One of my best friends has a very French name and her family was always very proud of their French heritage, until her dad took a DNA test and found no French in their background at all. I remember someone posting on Reddit about the same thing. They were from a very Italian family. All Italian first names, they only ate Italian food. You know, the way Nana used to make it. Just super into their Italian identity. The guy found out through a test they were all Polish or something, and everyone in the family lost their minds. That my father is a registered unspeakable act offender. Parents are divorced, if you're wondering. How did a DNA test reveal that? Arrest records, archived newspaper articles, you'd be shocked at what information is publicly available in some areas. My dad and aunt found out they had an older brother. Long story, my grandfather had a fling before he met my grandmother, never even knew that he had a son, went and lived his life, and some near 60 years later? Boom, ancestry test, here you go. So another really good story from this one. I exported my raw DNA from 23andMe and threw it through Prometheus to find out why I have porphyria, which is supposed to be hereditary. My mum and dad are definitely my mum and dad, but neither of them have this, which means it was environmental exposure that caused it. Discovered a rare AMPD enzyme deficiency in my mum, found out that dad carried a recessive lupus gene and gave it to my sister. DNA is wild. So I did a similar health DNA test 18 months ago because I wanted to see if I had the breast cancer gene. as there are several incidences on both sides of my family. Got my results and became very confused. It claimed I had no Italian, despite my father's grandma literally coming over from Sicily in 1920. It took me a few minutes to realize what that actually meant. My parents have been together since my mother was 14. I was born when she was 17, and my father joined the military and married my mother. Called my mum and she literally said, "That's interesting." Then she asked me to not talk to my father and she would explain everything the next time I visited. She did not and just refused to talk about it. Honestly, I was just shook. I didn't see it coming and it was never even presented to be a possibility to me. My sister ended up doing a DNA test and it showed that we were half siblings. I went no contact with my mother 4 months ago due to this incident and several others. I haven't told my dad, but I realized that at some point the truth is going to come out. My sister matched with some of my father's relatives while I did not, so if anyone checks that crap, they're going to be asking questions. Yep, even as a big advocate of the truth, I can see why you wouldn't want to be telling your dad. As some people have pointed out, a couple of people just can't see past the betrayal of their spouse and the realization that they aren't actually related to their children. I hope it all works out okay whatever way it goes. Always thought my grandfather on my father's side was adopted and thought our last name was just that of the family that adopted him. One DNA test later, and the family figures out that my great-grandparents got pregnant out of marriage and ran away. They came back with a child, saying it was adopted so they wouldn't be shamed for him. That's how we figured out that my last name is for sure from blood. Not me, my wife. A few years ago, my wife and I both took the 23andMe test. One of her matches came back with 23%, which is high for someone non-family. She messaged him and they started talking. He was about 10 years older and said he was adopted and the only thing he knew was some basic biological info. From his age, that would have put her mum at 14, but her mum never said anything about it. So the two options were her mum got knocked up young or grandma had a secret love child. She asked her youngest uncle, who said that when he was a kid, he remembered his sister going away for a few months because she was sick, and the family just pretended it never happened. He also said that before his mum, my wife's grandma, passed away, she told him all about it. So now my wife has a brother, a sister-in-law, and nieces and nephews. My mother-in-law is still around, but my wife does not have the best relationship with her. So my wife wanted to make sure she had all the information before she even approached her mother about this. Because in my wife's words, her mum, she's a few crayons short of a full pack. But yeah, they talked about it, and after trying to change the subject several times, her mum finally told her what we'd already figured out. We found out that my grandmother was biracial. She was abandoned shortly after birth at a church by an older white lady, adopted by a white farmer with 11 kids, and stopped talking to most of that family due to nondescript unpleasantness as an older teen. She died 20 years before I was born and looks like Maya Rudolph in the few photos that I've seen, but insisted she was part Sicilian. My father and his brother both look more white than not. My father worshipped the ground she walked on and never questioned her ancestry. My uncle was always pretty sure she was black and argued with her a lot. Both dad and uncle ended up being super active in the civil rights movement and still are devoted to anti-racism work nearly 60 years on, which largely stemmed from these discussions growing up. Anyway, my mum, divorced from my dad, got me a DNA test a few years ago. My grandmother was definitely half black. I have no Sicilian or Italian DNA. I've connected with a few black distant cousins over email and Zoom, and I'm waiting for the pandemic to mostly end to talk to my dad about it and introduce him to more family. I bet Italian got used as an explanation for darker skin quite a lot. Apparently, many mixed-race individuals back then attributed their darker skin to Native American or Italian ancestors. I knew about being conceived using ART, but I didn't know about the Dugarish number of half-siblings I had from the same donor. Frankly, it blindsided my parents too. The documentary The World's Biggest Family is about a man who finds out he has about 600 half-siblings from his sperm donor father. Things like this have led to tons of reform surrounding sperm donor laws. Imagine all of the involuntary inbreeding that could come out of an unchecked system. It's scary, but a lot less likely to happen now, thankfully. Not me, but a friend. My friend, 34, female, decided to get her twin sister and parents a DNA testing kit for Christmas. When her parents opened the gift, they looked at each other and said, "Oh, thanks." They quickly tried to move on to other presents. My friend was slightly confused, but dropped it. Later they went for their Christmas Day walk. The mum and sister were walking ahead while she walked with her dad. Her dad spilled the beans. Her and her sister were adopted. The mother looked back and started crying. She couldn't believe her husband told her daughter without them talking about it first. They were going to keep it a secret forever. She had never suspected she or her sister were adopted because they looked a lot like their parents. They're also very short, as are their parents. Whoops! My great-gran, who I knew, was an orphaned live-in servant in Greenock, Scotland in 1900. Got pregnant by her employer, got kicked out, ended up in the poorhouse where she abandoned the baby. DNA turned up the granddaughter of the baby. I met her in Glasgow a couple of years ago. She turned up as a cousin via DNA. I took a DNA test and found out I'm ethnically 25% Ashkenazi. After 8 months of serious digging, I found out my grandpa, my father's dad, is not my father's biological father. I have since come into contact with my half-uncle. He's super nice and I enjoy chatting with him. I love learning about my bio-grandpa and the rest of my family. We haven't told them and I don't plan on it. I have a small family, so it was such a great comfort to connect with more family, understand my lineage, and the history of my Jewish ancestors. Really a lovely experience. Hey, you might want to check if you have factor 11 deficiency. Pretty common. Shalom, fellow Ashkenazi. My great-great-grandfather claimed to be descended from Levites and said he was 100% Levite. I doubt it, it's been thousands of years, but I'm curious if your family said things like that too. My grandmother is the world's sweetest person and had a horrible, horrible woman as a mother. Her father, though, was incredible. She always talks about how I remind her of him, the small and sweet things they did together and how much she misses him. Recently, she told me that her mother would tell her, "He isn't your real father, you know," whenever she felt like hurting my grandmother some more. This continued until the day she died, and her father escaped her mother's abuse, and never spoke to my grandmother again. My nana doesn't blame him at all and still loves him very much to this day. She decided to go on Ancestry because she said she needs to know before she dies, although she said it wouldn't change anything about how she felt about him. Turns out, her awful mother was right. My grandmother found her biological family and loves to talk about her French heritage that she's learning about now. To this day, she doesn't hold anything against her non-biological dad. He took care of my grandmother when her mother wouldn't, knowing it wasn't his child. He loved her, soothed her, and nurtured her through as if she were his own. He saved my grandmother's spirit, I'll tell you that much. He helped shape her into the most miraculous human being I've ever met. To this day, I'll always refer to him as my great-grandfather, and if I have a son, I'll be naming him after him. The story always gets me very teary-eyed, but the thought of Alistair, my nana's pretend dad, always makes me really happy. I know it makes her happy too. What's the creepiest thing you've ever found in an old building? Went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building. Locked steel door at the bottom, so the only way up was to climb the outside up to the first landing. My buddy boosts me up. I climb over and there's a sleeping bag with a steak knife next to it on the landing. I call down, we're definitely not alone here, dude." "No, but it's cool," says a voice behind me, scaring the crap out of me and causing me to jump and whirl around. There's a young, dirty, homeless-looking guy just standing there, coming down the stairs from above, hands up, palms out. "I didn't mean to scare you." He takes a seat on the stairs, so I carefully step on the handle of the steak knife, lean down over the edge, and pull my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink beer, so we offer homeless guy a beer, which he gratefully accepts, and we shoot the crap on the landing for a while. We're talking about the city, the cops, traveling, life in general. He's basically a drifter, been in town for a week or so, but a nice guy. Things are going pretty well, and then he asks, "You guys are human, right?" I frickin' hate it when I meet people that end up being aliens. You never know until you peel their skin off. They've been after me a long time, you know. They don't stop. They never stop. Sometimes I think I should just kill everyone to be safe. He's definitely not joking, and there's an uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realize this guy is freaking crazy. "Yeah, man," I say, "we're human, we just wanted to check out the place and drink some beer. We're gonna go ahead and move on now. We definitely don't want to be any trouble." He just stares in silence, so we leave him the last beer, carefully back up to the railing, jump down and walk away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders the entire time. He's just standing there, still and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned 5 years later, and we've never been back. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but humans can be deceptive and dangerous in ways that you can't see coming. Holy crap! This guy seemed chill, but meeting people like him is what makes me tense when reading these stories. Ghosts, monsters, screw that, I'm worried about meeting some unpredictable creep or a Satanist mid-ritual. Also, serial killers. I wonder how many of his ilk I pass in normal places every day. Definitely don't want to meet them anywhere, especially alone in a dark abandoned building. That's a cool story for sure though. A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple of years ago in the OKC metro. It was very unsafe at night for a silly college freshman like us. The first experience we had was all of us taking our merry time, enjoying the darkness and generally messing around. You have to come in through a broken window, and we were all gathered at the window just being dumb when we hear loud, echoing footsteps down the hall running toward us. We all did that. Who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us? Look and turn, and after realizing that we're all present and none of us are sprinting down a dark, abandoned hallway, we booted it out of there. The second time we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping from around corners and such, but they never got too close. We assumed it was an animal at first, but got brave and realized it was a person. We managed to catch them, and after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged-up 20-somethings who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we got the not-so-good vibes. Finally, you say? And we tried to leave. The leader of the haunted asylum cronies asked if we had jewelry, which we denied. He then said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep. We freaking bolted. What? Why ever did you run? Seemed like a nice, well-adjusted fellow. People these days are so judgmental. I'm kidding, of course. I wouldn't blame you if you were still running, guy who wrote this story 6 years ago. Nothing big, but I was once exploring a drainage tunnel with friends. We were pretty deep inside of it and turned a corner to see someone leaning against a wall with a hat on. It ended up being a sandbag someone dressed up, but it scared the crap out of me because it was pretty deep in there. There were pants and shoes and a jacket with a hat on it. I don't know what they did to make the jeans look like legs because I didn't touch it or go back. A friend of mine went back and told me it was a sandbag and I was already done for the day. So someone a long time ago went in there and dressed up a sandbag just so someone else would be spooked? We were kids exploring an underground flood channel. There were spots we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street, but that required crawling up weird diagonal tunnels. There were 4 of us, maybe 12 years old, 1 flashlight. The walls were all graffitied with a lot of gang stuff and even warnings to turn back. Blah blah blah. We just interpreted that as other kids being bored. We got to the spot where the ceiling angled down quite low to the point the opening was so small we had to crawl to continue. Challenge accepted. It looked like it opened up again shortly, so we crawled through 5 to 6 feet of the low area when it opened back up. It looked like we were in a large round concrete pipe. Before it was square or rectangular. Still lots of graffiti. We started yelling and playing with the echoes, then we thought we heard something, so we got quiet. Then a real loud, "You're gonna freaking die!" came echoing from the darkness. The kid with the flashlight ran so fast, the rest of us were left in absolute darkness. Anyways, this was the first time we passed the low spot, but the last time we went down there. None of us died that day. The rest of us ended up quietly and slowly walking out in the darkness. This isn't urban exploration, more rural exploration, I suppose you could call it. I was working on a project for a photography project. There was a massive forest up a mountain near where I live. Said forest contains an abandoned hospital that was shut down after an unexplained death. No, I'm not joking. So it's a crappy day weather-wise. I'm in a wood with a camera and a packed lunch ready to go wandering. After a few hours, I found a small camp with some abandoned tools, including a massive bolt cutter. Someone had tried to destroy them in a fire, but that was a no-go. Maybe 200 to 300 meters away, I found a burned-out car. Not an uncommon sight in the area. Kids buy super crappy, clapped-out bangers and trash them up there. Not far away, about running distance, I found a pair of woman's jeans. And a little further away from that, maybe 5 meters or so, there was a pair of panties hanging on a low branch. They'd clearly been there for a while. I'm not sure how long underwear would last exposed to Irish weather, and these were right out in the open, but a few weeks maybe? Pretty creepy finding all of that alone in the woods. I flipped through local news for anything on any break-ins, assaults, or anything suspicious, and couldn't find anything that had happened recently. For the record, I did contact police, but they pretty much told me it was just littering, no actual evidence of any wrongdoing. My friends, who always go exploring, told me about this time that they were just following a trail that went up into the hills, and after almost reaching the freeway, they ended up near an old closed-up train tunnel. They were able to squeeze through some of the loose fencing, and after wandering through with nothing of interest, they eventually came to a bunch of shipping containers. They told me that when they glanced inside, they saw a ton of weapons and ammunition in one, and just a crap ton of heavy boxes in the rest. After a few minutes of checking it out, they heard voices from further down the tunnel coming closer, so they got out of there. They also said it almost smelled like the ocean toward the end, so the tunnel might have led out near the beach. The place they hiked to was somewhere between Santa Barbara and Oxnard in California, as they stopped on the 101 going southbound and started their hike and ended up returning to the car and going to Oxnard at the end of the day. They made a report to the police, but I haven't heard of anything coming of that on the news or otherwise. Also, some people said it might be smugglers, but given that the crates were unlocked, the tunnel was unguarded, and it was accessible to anyone who wandered out there, I doubt that's the case. If it was, they were either just about to take off or they were really stupid smugglers. Last winter, I went into this abandoned parking lot under a closed shopping mall. It had 2 levels. The upper level had a bit of sunlight coming in through the windows, but the lower level was pitch black. I made my way down this wide ramp that the cars would use, and I decided to have a look at the bottom level. After turning my flashlight on, I noticed that the space was huge, much bigger than the upper level. I remember how the light danced through the many supporting pillars and cast vivid shadows. I said, "Hello," and "I'm just looking around," just to make my intentions clear, but was met with no response. So I decided to walk around for a bit, but couldn't see anything of interest. Just a lot of junk, some empty old bottles, but nothing that might indicate someone living or hanging around there. The place seemed completely abandoned, however this uneasy feeling that someone might be hiding in the pitch black shadow of one of these pillars took the better of me, and I climbed up the ramp. I left taking a different route and passed under an overhead clearing that snow had fallen through. Just as I was about to hop the fence and leave, I noticed that the patch of snow that had formed had footprints on it. I know this doesn't really sound horrifying when you read it, as the logical explanation was that some poor chap had probably taken shelter from the cold outside, inside the lot. But still, being there creeped the heck out of me. I don't know what's creepier, this place or you saying, "I'm just taking a look around," to make sure nobody was there. If I were homeless and living in an abandoned place, I wouldn't respond to anybody saying, "I just want to look around." It seems like an easy way to make yourself a serial killer's next drifter victim. No thanks. Rural area landscape photography. Happen upon a long abandoned house and set up to snap a few images. Look in the window and it's perfectly furnished. Piano with music open, fishing gear, wood stove with fire nearby, magazines on coffee table, jackets on a coat rack, roll-top desk open with neatly stacked papers, family photos, small kitchen table with red tops and matching chairs, and one is pulled out. It was all covered in inches of dust. It looked like someone walked out in 1950 and never returned. That sounds equal parts haunting and beautiful. Although I'm not superstitious, my hackles would be up and I would be out of there at the first sign of any shadow that even looked vaguely ghost-like. Went to a closed-up mental hospital in my city with some friends at night. Everything was cool until we got to the basement, where there were 5-meter wide and 4-meter high lit tunnels going far to both directions. We headed down one and found a huge active generator. Then we went to the other way, and as we were about to hit another intersection, we saw 2 men wearing full green attire and face masks walking at the end of one of the corridors at 2 a.m. We got out of there real quick. This didn't happen to be in Northville, Michigan, did it? If so, it's really more of a teal outfit. Well, we found the crystal cook, guys. Went to an abandoned retirement home/assisted living facility. Turns out it became the home to a group of crazy homeless crystal addicts and one very angry raccoon. They did not like trespassers. The guardians of the galaxy have fallen on hard times. I was exploring a certain abandoned mill near a large city on the coast with a friend. We snuck in, messed around a bit, and realized that we only had one flashlight. Took turns, weird noises, dark inside because there's no power, evidence of homeless occupation and empty needles. Real horror game material. We came up the stairway and turned a corner. Ahead is a walkway bridge, aka the way to the rest of the building. To the right is a pitch black room that doesn't feel very nice. As we walk toward the bridge, the flashlight picks out a sign that says, "To hell," and points towards this dark room. We didn't go in. It didn't feel right. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friends and I used to explore this old factory/processing plant, no idea what it was originally. Anyway, it had lots of underground sections that were pitch black, even a couple of meters from the entrance, but which also required going down a flight of stairs. One time we found a burned-out car 2 to 3 levels down. No idea how it got there, but that was kind of creepy. Another time we found a hole. We didn't bring torches or flashlights with us because we're idiots. But we had lighters and we were trying to figure out what the hole was or if it could lead anywhere. We put a stick in there and it ended up being at least 6 feet deep, but we also learned it was full of some liquid and that if we had fallen in we could have easily drowned in the dark. Another time we went a couple of levels down and one of us at the bottom started screaming shrieks of absolute terror and the rest of us thought that we were all going to be murdered. We all started running, everyone was screaming at this point, and there was this sludgy crap on the ground, and some of us slipped and fell just like in a gosh darn horror movie, slipping and sliding our limbs out of control. Again, there's 6+ people screaming bloody fricking murder with absolute fear and terror on their faces, so we all thought we were going to get murdered. Turns out a baby bird had made a nest down there and my sister got spooked and my friend screamed like an absolute baby. There was an abandoned hotel I was checking out. I gained access through a blown-out window near the indoor pool. It smelled like death inside. Came in to find a couple of bloated dead deer in the slime collecting towards the deep end of the pool. That should have been my sign to go. I make my way into the lobby and banquet areas, and I come across a couple of raccoons and squirrels who scurry away swiftly. Nearly everything is destroyed, even the reception desk has been ripped in half. Nothing of interest to photograph, just trash. Neat little piles of trash. After a bit of searching, I find the stairwell. There's an odd noise coming from above that I brush off as rain. I decide to skip a couple of floors because they're probably in the same condition as the lobby, and a lot of the exterior windows had been blown out. I get to 4 and open the door, not worried about noise as I'm confident that I'm the only sober person on the premise, if not the only person. As I pull the door open, the rain noise suddenly ceases completely. I point my flashlight down the hallway and see hundreds of geese poke their heads out of the guest rooms. I remember the moment when nothing moved and we just stared at each other as lasting several minutes, although I'm sure it was about 10 seconds. Here I am in the middle of the hall, geese of abandoned luxury staring me down. Once the initial shock of the sight wears off, I remember I'm only looking at half the floor. Behind me, geese aren't pulling a deer in the headlights move, they're coming toward me. Time to go. I close the stairwell behind me, only muffling the cacophony that erupted once I moved. As I hustled down the stairs, I realized the signs were there. Goose crap everywhere. I hit the lobby and turn toward the pool where a group of geese has collected as if they were trying to trap me. Luckily, they're just dumb birds. I got out to find the exterior of the hotel swarming with the frickers. There was one lone sentinel standing on the roof honking out a shrill command that the perimeter had been breached. Exploring an abandoned construction site. It's a site out in redneck country that's got a bunch of old construction vehicles getting overgrown with plants, and my girlfriend and I decide to check it out, to see what it's all about. We look around and don't see a whole lot. It's about to rain, so we decide to head out. As we're getting in my car, my girlfriend freezes and says, "There's a guy in the woods watching us." I crap myself and ask if she's sure. She repeats herself and says she saw her see him, and he laid flat on the ground to hide himself. We noped out of there real frickin' quick. I live in a large African city which still has a fair amount of undeveloped or undevelopable space. And one rule to remember is that there is always someone else there that you may not see. There are people who sit alone, very quietly, in bushes or between boulders and other such places. They are, I think, harmless and don't do anything. But what they are doing has been a mystery to me for the 10+ years I've been here. Most of them are too well dressed or well taken care of to be homeless. One annoying thing is that they stare at you, or at least they don't hide the fact that they're watching you. I swear, if there was some completely inaccessible cave high up in a cliff here, requiring professional scaling equipment to enter, they would find a local African guy just chilling inside with no discernible means of how he got there. I mean, honestly, if he can get up there along with his means of cooking and entertaining himself, that just deserves an applause more than anything. Got to admire the effort. This phenomenon of the people in abandoned spaces has raised some questions, detailed here. This is the funniest crap I've ever heard. Please work up the balls just to talk to one and see what's going on. Well, greetings are very important here, so if I stumble upon someone like that, I'm obliged to greet them. They just greet back normally as if we're neighbors passing on the street. But I don't stop and talk because I don't know what they're doing. I've encountered this too in Madagascar. I'm not exactly sure what it's about. There it's just mostly older folks. Maybe they've reached a point in life where their kids are taking care of them, and they're respected, so they just hang out and think. I guess a lot of the ones I see are older, that's true. I went to the abandoned living complex in Pennsylvania called Concrete City. We walked around a bunch of the buildings and stuff. At one point, one of my friends yelled, "Rich, come here!" I ran over, and there they were, 2 little kittens on a staircase, with the words "Cloud Swag" spray-painted above them. We brought them home and I kept one. He still terrorizes me every day. When I was in college, a few friends and I went to this local abandoned hotel. It was a swanky place back in the 50s, but had just been sitting around abandoned and fenced off ever since. We walked by and saw an open window on a second-story ledge and ended up finding an old wooden ladder nearby on the property. We went in and hung around a bit and saw a bit of great graffiti. The whole place was trashed with actual garbage as well as bits of the building that were falling apart. We made it up the staircase to the third floor, looking in each of the rooms. The area we were in used to be the housing for the staff of the hotel. The third floor was covered in garbage from throughout the years. We got to the last room on the third floor and looked in it to find a lit candle, with no one else around. Realizing we weren't alone, we booked it out of there, and once we were outside, looked up to see someone watching us from one of the windows. Now, we went to college in a city with a significant homeless problem and assumed we'd just stumbled onto someone's home, but still, that crap freaked us out. They cemented up the place after another explorer fell down an open elevator shaft and broke his legs, and it has recently been renovated and they're turning it into an apartment building. Not the creepiest find, but definitely freaked us out in the moment. In conclusion, searching an abandoned hotel, we found a lit candle that wasn't ours and was secretly watched by a squatter on the way out. This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My urban explorer friends and I were on a bike ride looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area when we discovered a really creepy cave. An old abandoned cement mine, we later learned. We did some mild exploring that first day, but quickly realized it would require a lot more gear to thoroughly explore. Flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later, 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered that there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti, X was here, swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone, and we were relying solely on flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank goodness for the respirators. The glow sticks we had bought to mark our way to prevent getting lost were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought 10 or so. At this point, we started arguing amongst ourselves. Several of the crew was nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible, and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We were probably a quarter mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to override that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward, so we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but no longer willing to admit that to each other. Then we stumbled across something that made us all stop cold. Dug into the side of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a tunnel, an offshoot. It was narrow, you'd have to crouch to go through it, and it was also a good few feet off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop, it was the graffiti. We hadn't seen any for 10 minutes or so and assumed that the artists never came this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the message they left us was ominous. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Scrawled throughout the tunnel were words like suffering, pain, plague, disease, and hell. It was pretty terrifying. Who else would come this far just to write such terrible messages in a mysterious tunnel that broke off from the main path? But there was no turning back now, we had to see where the tunnel led to. Despite our fear, we were overpowered by intense curiosity. So one by one, we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange flooded chamber. Around the pool of water were many large stones, each covered in dozens of burned-out tea candles. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles in the place. The walls had a few creepy monster faces, poorly graffitied on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted, blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some weird ritual site for local Satan worshippers? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids? We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were running out of adrenaline to keep exploring. We all crawled out of that weird hellhole and back into the main shaft, where we promptly headed toward the exit. When we finally saw that pin crack of natural light coming from the real world outside, we were flooded with relief. We never did figure out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it a mystery. No, we didn't hear any monsters in the depths of the tunnel or find any bloody Satan praisers themselves, but just finding that room, buried deep in an old forgotten mine, was enough to creep us all out for a long time. Lawyers and law enforcers. What are the most common laws people understand incorrectly? Many people assume that if the police, in the USA, don't read you your Miranda rights when you're arrested, it means you win the case. Not so. It only means that you may get things you said excluded from trial, if you said them in response to police interrogation while in custody. I got arrested and they didn't read my rights until we got back to the station. Unlike in movies and TV, where they read them right away usually. The whole time I had a shred of hope that they would forget and I would get off because of that. It can ruin the DA's entire case, however, particularly if the person who is arrested makes the classic mistake of talking to the cops. Basically, if they don't read you your Miranda rights and you subsequently confess to the crime, that confession goes out the window, along with anything they've got on you as a consequence of that confession. For example, you confessing and telling them where your stash was, etc. Unless they can convincingly prove that it was not as a result of that. For a lot of minor crimes, the DA actually will not pursue it if your Miranda rights weren't read to you, as the level of difficulty has increased too much. I should point out the above only applies to evidence gained after arrest while the police are interrogating you. I'm just clarifying that's what I'm referring to, not you spontaneously confessing in the back of the cop car. The European Court of Human Rights has nothing to do with the EU. Actually, I did not know this. It's not quite true. The ECTHR initially had nothing to do with the EU, but now the EU is a signatory and EU countries have to be signatories. Tell that to the tabloids. I hate seeing the two conflated so often. Is this a common error where you're from? It's kind of willful ignorance on behalf of people in the UK who think we should leave the EU for no reason other than recovering our sovereign power. Lawyer here. I like when people say, "I'll see you in court." No, you won't. Most of us rarely ever go through a full-blown jury trial like on TV. We avoid jury trials as they're expensive and time-consuming. But saying, "My attorney will see your attorney at a settling table at one of their offices to work out a reasonable agreement," doesn't quite have the same ring to it. I like that one better. Feels less like an escalation. Less, "You will be hurt for this," and more, "This'll get sorted out by professionals. This is my pro's number. Have your pro call them. Cheers." No, as a dramatic diva of a man, I have to say that not being able to scream, "See you in court," at the slightest inconvenience would be a significant detractor from my life's enjoyment. That you're entitled to one phone call from jail if you're arrested. This is not actually a constitutional requirement or even a nationwide standard. Telephones wouldn't need to be invented at the time of the drafting of the Constitution in order for a constitutional requirement, or right, to attach to the technology. Case in point, the Supreme Court unanimous decision this week that a warrant is required to search a person's cell phone, an extension of constitutional search and seizure protections to cell phones, which didn't exist until 1872, more than 20 years after Thomas Edison invented the Constitution. That some of your rights only apply to the government. Yes, a private citizen or business owner can certainly inhibit your right to free speech. More people need to recognize this. As a weapon owner, my individual right to own and carry a sidearm ends the moment I go from a public place into a private business or residence abode. If they disagree with me, they have the right to remove me from their premises however they see fit, as I'm now infringing upon their right to exercise, or not exercise, their Second Amendment rights within their walls. I use the Second Amendment as an example because it's the easiest to convey since there's a physical object involved. This applies equally to all rights though. In the cliché example of shouting, "Fire!" in a crowded theater, this person is infringing upon the exercise of a business's First Amendment rights. Because they would be within the walls of that business, the business rights trump their right to say what they want. Furthermore, in the theater example, the person who shouted fire could also be charged for needlessly causing mass hysteria, which is against the law as well. Freedom of speech is restricted in certain cases. Almost. Fire in a movie theater is an example of limits to free speech in a public space, as it threatens the livelihood of your co-citizens. It's an example of the clear and present danger portion of the incitement test, which is commonly known as the prohibition of inspiring an angry mob into action with free speech. So yes, if the US had a Tahrir Square and it was filled with angry protesters, you might not be allowed to get on a megaphone and demand revolution. It would depend on how likely the protesters would be moved to violence in the near future. I like to joke that you can advocate the overthrow of a government until there's a chance of anything actually happening about it. Businesses are not required to accept your 10-pound bag of pennies because it's legal tender. It just means that you can use that to pay and debts that you have. And as you're not in debt to that business, yes, they can refuse your legal tender. This concept came up on Reddit a while back. What I took from it was that McDonald's can refuse your money, but Applebee's can't. Yes, when you want to eat something at McDonald's, you're effectively proposing a trade for the food. When you want to eat something at Applebee's, you're going into debt for the cost of your meal. All debts in the US must be able to be paid off with US currency, but no one has to accept an offer to trade with US currency. It depends on whether you're considered a debtor or not. For instance, if you're attempting to purchase something, then you're not in debt to the store and they can refuse to accept the payment. However, if you tow my car, impound it, and then tell me that I'm in your debt for X dollars and that you will not return my car until then you would have to accept X dollars worth of pennies unless there was some existing contract between us that said otherwise. That only the government or the government employees acting in their official capacity can violate a person's federal constitutional rights. To use a somewhat outdated example, the Duck Dynasty guy has a First Amendment right to say what he wants, but A&E can fire him for it, call him up, rehire him, fire him for practicing his Second Amendment rights, call him up, rehire him again, and fire him for petitioning the government. They may be violating American ideals, state constitutions, or federal and state statutes, but they are not violating his First Amendment rights because the Constitution only binds the federal government, and selectively state governments through the 14th Amendment. A&E is not a government entity, so the federal Constitution doesn't prohibit it from doing anything. I hate how no one on my Facebook seems to understand this. People seem to think that pleading insanity means getting off. Generally, you go to the mental health facility until you're cured. Possibly forever, well, just until a board of doctors are willing to bet their reputations that you won't break any more laws, instead of prison for X years. The amount of time spent locked up after a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is almost always longer than the amount of time that would have been served if found guilty. However, sometimes, the institute is a much better place than the prison you would have ended up in. You never really hear about mental health facility gangs. They think they see you, but it's just the schizophrenia kicking in. Basic federalism principles, the idea that federal law trumps state law. Mary J may have been legalized in a given state, but you're still breaking federal law, which still classifies green herb as a Schedule I controlled substance. So sure, the state police won't arrest you, but the DEA can still arrest you. Furthermore, and I can't stress this enough, if you're in federal territory of any kind, green herb is illegal. California respects medical green herb. If you have a card, that's great. But once you step into Yosemite National Park, it is illegal, and the Eastern District of California is more than welcome to prosecute your rear end for possession. It's strange, I would have thought that a national park would be a great place to wander off, have some green herb, and feel close to nature. Although I feel like this particular law isn't going to stop many people from doing so. Age of consent. Most states have a sliding scale. In Missouri, it's 17, but if you're under 21, your partner can be 14 years old. However, laws on publishing videos and pictures of it are different for obvious reasons. You can legally do the deed with your 17-year-old partner, but you can't take pictures of it. There is case law exactly on this situation. Also, marginal tax rates, more accounting than legal, but they are tax laws. A lot of people believe that your entire income is taxed at a certain rate based on how much income you made that year. Rather, it's a sliding scale where the first portion is not taxed at all, then another portion is taxed at a low percentage, then the next portion is taxed higher, and so on. If I knew the percentages, I would quote them, but I'm not looking them up. Sadly, the ACA was not created this way and can create some really dangerous income issues for people receiving subsidies. Oh man, I'm an engineer and some of my coworkers still don't understand marginal tax. You'll still hear talk of, I hope I only get a 2.9% raise this year, because 3% will bump me up into the next tax bracket. It's baffling. Some of the most commonly misunderstood ones, they can't arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. If you don't sign any documents, you can't be found guilty. Yar, take to the sea. Do not remove this tag under penalty of law except by the consumer. No, you won't go to jail for ripping tags off mattresses or pillows. The consumer is allowed to remove the tag. Are you sure? Actually, yes and yes. The tags are regulated for businesses that sell them, so the consumer can know what they're buying. So this all came about because at one point, companies were advertising one thing and selling consumers something else. There are so many cases where government regulation makes sense and is the only thing protecting the swimmers from the sharks. Exactly. Without these tags, manufacturers could fill mattresses, pillows, etc. with any material, even material from used mattresses. Yuck. Once you buy it, you can rip the tag off. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to pull rank on you. I didn't want to have to do this. I'm with the mattress police. There are no tags on these mattresses. I get tons of calls asking if they can get a divorce for adultery or abandonment. This is despite the fact that most states, Ohio and New York being the only holdouts, did away with fault divorce over 30 years ago. In Kentucky, we went no-fault divorce in 1973. Long story short, in an argument with my then-wife while on the phone with my lawyer, found out she had cheated, she screamed that infidelity was not grounds for divorce. My lawyer replied, "She is correct, but infidelity is grounds for a custody suit." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm in law school right now, and many people in Germany don't exactly know the lifelong prison sentence. It's not really lifelong like some people believe. It's imprisonment for an indefinite time period, but minimum 15 years. The average lifelong prison term is about 20 years. This varies by country, and in the USA, by state. If you get a life sentence in the state of Pennsylvania, you will die in prison, barring appeals or revocation of sentence. Other states, like California, are like Germany, where a life sentence can mean you're eligible for parole after a predetermined amount of time. Lawyer here. All of them. People are idiots. Redditors especially. Breaking Bad taught me that, contrary to popular belief, undercover police officers are not required to answer truthfully when you ask, "Are you a cop?" Long story short, don't sell substances. I never quite understood how people could believe this was possible. Probably because they confuse it with entrapment. Entrapment is baiting people unreasonably to do something they wouldn't normally do. Undercover is pretending you're not a cop to see what people normally do. Bird law. People think they can keep hummingbirds as pets, but they're illegal tender. Not saying I agree, it's just the bird laws in this country. It's not governed by reason. Let's say you and I go toe-to-toe on bird law and see who comes out the victor. Filibuster? Thank you to everyone for furthering this debate on the very important points of law raised in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. How your stuff gets distributed when you die. No, it doesn't all go to your husband or wife, most of the time. No, your $10 LegalZoom rocket lawyer will is not good enough, most of the time. Estate planning attorneys don't pay the bills by selling wills or power of attorney. People who die without wills or with poorly drafted wills keep our lights on. When my father died intestate, that is, without a will, the laws of the state specified that half of his estate went to his wife, my mother, and the rest was divided amongst his children, me, my brother, and my half-sister. That was simple enough until my half-sister became estranged from the rest of the family and was out of touch with my mother, her stepmother. And then my father's mother died intestate, leaving money and property to my father's estate and his living sister, my aunt. My father's share of my grandmother's estate needed to be split, half to my mother and 1/6 to each of my father's kids, but nobody knew where my half-sister was. Eventually, several years later, a company wanted to acquire rights to some of the property that had been my grandmother's. An agent of that company had to track down all the heirs, and discovered that my half-sister had died. That agent was then in the awkward position of telling my mom that her stepdaughter was dead. Oh wow, I've been waiting for this question. Being protected from discrimination does not mean that you're protected from buttholes. In other words, your employer or co-worker is allowed to decide he doesn't like you, which means he's discriminated between you and another person, so long as he hasn't made that decision based upon your race, color, or religious belief. In other words, you're not entitled to employment. The only thing you're entitled to is to not be discriminated against based on something out of your control, such as your skin color or your gender. The age at which a child in the United States can decide which parent they wish to reside with is, wait for it, 18. Yeah, that's right. If you're a child, you're not allowed to make decisions for yourself. That is up to the family court judge to make based upon the best interests of the child. We have free speech in this country. That means that if someone says something to you that you don't like, you can't sue them for libel or slander unless all of the following apply. Number 1, it's false. 2. It's been communicated to a third party, not just to you. 3. It affects your reputation for morality in the community. And 4. You have suffered either or both emotional and physical health repercussions as a result of the statement, or financial repercussions, or all three. There are certain things that, if said, do not require number 4, such as a statement that you have a venereal disease. That's called slander per se, but these are rare statements, so usually you need number 4. Double jeopardy, thanks to the movie of the same name. Please expand. What is misunderstood about this? In the movie, a woman is convicted of murdering her husband. Once she gets out, she finds out that he's still alive and set her up for murder. She then hunts him down and murders him for real because she can't be tried for the same crime twice. Double jeopardy actually means you can't be tried twice for the same instance of crime, but it doesn't mean that if you were falsely accused of one crime, you now have free rein to go commit that crime for real. In that situation, the two crimes are not the exact same occurrence of a crime. One was a previous crime, and one was a totally separate, later crime. As another example, let's say Guy A is arrested for beating up Guy B on charges of assault and battery. Years later, Guy A beats up Guy B again. Arresting and trying him a second time would not be a double jeopardy in the real world, but it would be under the logic of the movie. A good way to demonstrate the other side of double jeopardy is the O.J. Simpson case. He was tried in criminal court, possible prison sentence, and found innocent. He was later tried in civil court, basically only fines and settlements, and found guilty. Double jeopardy means that you can't be tried for the same instance of a crime in the same court. You can still be tried in the other, civil and criminal court, for the same instance of the crime. So don't go write a book about how you committed a crime after getting off at one court. Actually a lawyer here, and there haven't been many stories from other actual lawyers here because we don't want any of you to think that we've given you some kind of legal advice that you're going to end up relying on that turns out wrong for wherever you live. For example, if you're in Ohio, I could probably give you some solid advice. Any of the other 49 states or any other countries? Not so much. Sure, there are general rules that we all get from the SCOTUS, but even that can be open to interpretation by lower courts, and SCOTUS typically set floors or ceilings. Miranda, for example, sets forth the minimum warnings that police are supposed to give you. Some state could easily add more warnings to that. So it makes it kind of hard for us to give you guys advice on this stuff because depending on where you live, we might be wrong. There we have it, folks. I will note that I remove a lot of the not a lawyer headings because otherwise they get repetitive, and we should take note that most of these posts are both from the questioned profession and bystanders. I just pick the stories that seem credible-ish and entertaining. A hostile work environment is not illegal in and of itself, it's only unlawful if, among other things, the hostility is based on a protected characteristic such as race, gender, age, disability, religion, etc. In short, it's not illegal for your boss to be a butthole, it's illegal for the butthole to single people out because they belong to a protected class, though. I think people commonly confuse assault and battery. Assault is threat of imminent harm. Battery is unlawful physical contact. In the UK, if I punch you from behind, that's battery. If you see me punching you, assault and battery. Assault is fearing imminent violence upon yourself. It's not someone punching you. It's what happens before someone punches you and you fear being attacked. In Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms only protects you from the government impeding the rights laid out in the document, not from other private entities doing it. My divorce lawyer friend says common law marriage. There are only 9 states that recognize it, and even then it's not clear-cut. Someone will be breaking up with someone after 10 years and tell her they get half, right? Because of common law marriage. Sorry, not in this state, she always has to tell them. In the US, specifically Texas, jurisdictions vary, you do not have the right to a free attorney for criminal cases. The law states that you have the right to have an attorney represent you. If you cannot afford one, then one will be provided for you. My judge, an IMA prosecutor, routinely denies the public defender for people requesting a lawyer after looking at their financial situation. The person who throws the first punch is not necessarily the offender. New Zealand here. No, you can't sue anyone like they do in America. Full stop. End of story. Don't ask me again. Get out of the courthouse. You don't need a body to prove a murder. You just need to show so much evidence that a missing person is dead and has been murdered by the suspect to prove murder. This has led to some misunderstandings. There are 2 falsely held beliefs that are sort of related. One, that you never have to give the police your consent to a search. If they have the ability to search your car or property, they wouldn't be asking you for consent. You wouldn't believe how many people don't understand this. 2, the police and their agents can and will lie to you. People seem to think driving under the influence means actually driving. Drunk and in your car with the keys within reach? Yeah, that's a DUI. Doesn't matter if the engine wasn't running, at least in most states. Which, to be fair, is a pretty crappy law, but you're right about how it works. Not a law per se, but the concept of judicial review. I'm amazed at how many people struggle with the idea that when the US Supreme Court hands down an opinion on a question of federal law, be it constitutional law, statutory interpretation, or what have you, that the court's word is final. That is, of course, until the law changes, from a constitutional amendment, congressional repeal, modification, enactment of statute, etc. Freedom of speech means that the government can't arrest you, fine you, etc. for anything you say, barring conspiracy to commit a crime or hate speech. It in no law protects you from any other consequence, such as an employer firing you, an establishment banning you, etc. Jury nullification. This isn't some hidden constitutional trick. It's a de facto circumstance through which a jury can acquit a person who would otherwise be guilty under the law if the jury disagrees with the law. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and it almost certainly won't work for you when you shoot at police for violating your constitutional right to live in a tree or whatever. At-will employment? Yes, you can probably be fired for that. No, you probably can't sue your employer. Proving discrimination in an isolated circumstance is almost impossible. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.